Chapter 532. The quality of the seal depended not only on the number of words on it, but also on the meaning of the words. There were thousands of words in the world, and the word heaven was the best in terms of meaning. In terms of quality, one word was comparable to two words. Judging from the amount of light left on the seal, it didn't even use half of the light to condense the first word. Therefore, my celestial master seal had more than one word. My previous worries and uneasiness were all gone at this moment. I already knew that even if the number of words on the seal was not as many as Lu Jinyang and Officer Wang, it wouldn't be much different. Moreover, judging from the meaning of the word heaven alone was enough to surpass the two of them. I calmed down and stopped worrying about gains and losses. I concentrated on looking at the light carefully. When condensing the celestial master seal, the light that appeared was the phenomenon caused by the true essence in the celestial master's body resonating with heaven and earth. When one's cultivation reached the celestial master realm, he had already left the mortal world. When cultivating in the earth master realm, one only needed to focus on oneself. One should focus on oneself and ignore the disturbances of the outside world. One should meditate and cultivate on his own. Only in this way could he make rapid progress. When one reached the celestial master realm, it was different. Those who could open the door to the celestial master realm didn't lack willpower and talent. However, if one wanted to move forward, willpower and talent weren't enough. Next, it depended on luck. What was luck? Literally, it was luck and fate. When one reached this realm, who could give him a chance? The young god celestial master couldn't, and the immortals who ascended couldn't either. The only thing that could give a celestial master a chance was heaven. Grasping a heaven-sent opportunity was a blessing. Therefore, the cultivation of a celestial master focused on comprehending the will of heaven. As for what the will of heaven was, the ancients had already made a conclusion. Heaven and earth are black and yellow. The universe is primitive. The sun and the moon are dim. The stars and the mansions are open. Winter comes and summer goes. Autumn harvests and winter hides. Leap into adulthood, Lu Tiaoyang. Clouds bring rain, and dew turns into frost. Gold is born in Li Shui, and jade comes out of Kang'an. Everything in the world was the will of heaven, but it couldn't be comprehended by people. Immortals who ascended to the celestial master realm might be able to see the will of heaven from the mortal world. However, as a celestial master who had just touched this realm, he didn't have the ability to hear of thunder in silence or see of flowers in colorlessness. Only when there was a natural phenomenon could he see the will of heaven. What of natural phenomenon? Changes were imminent. In layman's terms, when there was thunder and rain, the weather would change. When there was an earthquake, the mountains would collapse and the earth would surge. However, the world was vast and boundless, and there were a myriad of phenomena within it. So, it was extremely difficult to discern the will of the heavens from these phenomena. The will of the heavens was hard to fathom, and the mysteries of the heavens were hard to find. However, the word opportunity was not only about opportunity, but also about fate. Some celestial phenomena were difficult to see through, but some celestial phenomena were blessings bestowed by the heavens. For example, this 10-colored light. This multicolored light was born from the resonance of one's true essence with the heavens and earth. It was a response from the heavens to man, a perfect opportunity to peep into the will of the heavens. Therefore, when forming the seal, it was even more important for the heavenly master to use it to spy on the will of the heavens and pave the way for his future cultivation. These principles were profound and abstruse. It was extremely difficult for a new heavenly master to comprehend them. Although I don't think I'm inferior to others in terms of intelligence, I'm not a freakishly intelligent person. I'm able to understand these principles by relying on the records in the death scripture. The contents of the death scripture silk cloth could be said to be a hodgepodge of cultivation that encompassed everything. However, I discovered a long time ago that the words recorded on it were mostly some basic matters. As my realm increased, there was less for me to comprehend. Regarding the essence of a heavenly master's cultivation and the opportunity to condense a seal, That was the last content on the Death Scripture cloth. In other words, in my current realm, the Death Scripture silk cloth that guided me into the sect and was regarded as my mentor would no longer be of use to me. Thinking of this, I became slightly absent-minded. However, after all these years of cultivation, I'd long cultivated a rock-solid will. After a while, I recovered, and my mental state didn't fluctuate. As the saying goes, the master leads the way, but cultivation depends on the individual. Even if there were no more teachings in the future, the Death Scripture silk cloth had already led me into the door of a heavenly master. In the future, I'd search for opportunities on my own, so I didn't need to rely too much on external objects. Straightening out my thoughts, I continued to focus my attention on the 10-colored light and silently gazed at it. At first, I was still paying attention to the second word that the multicolored light was condensing. However, very quickly, my eyes were only focused on the multicolored light. Under my full concentration, the multicolored light seemed to be much closer to me. I felt as though I was surrounded by the multicolored light. When I looked up, I could see that the multicolored light was made up of countless cylindrical particles. After seeing these particles, I had an absurd thought. According to physics, light is a photon beam and is made up of photons. Could it be that I'm seeing photons? Of course, that's impossible. Photons are tiny. Even with my current cultivation, it's impossible for me to see these tiny photons with my eyesight. Not long after, the cylindrical particles suddenly enlarged in front of me. Only then did I clearly see that these cylindrical particles were the portraits of people. The first to enter my eyes were my parents, followed by the portraits of my childhood relatives, neighbors, and playmates. Only then did I realize that the light was concealing my life's memories. From my first cry when I was a child that I couldn't even remember, to when I learned to walk, to when I learned how to speak, to when I went to school. From playing with my playmates, to working in the fields with my parents, to studying at night when I was taking my exams. Countless scenes that I had long since forgotten in my memories flowed continuously along with the multicolored light. Later on, I followed the fatty to the mountain behind the middle school, drank the burial mound wine, met Swan and I. All the memories of my path of cultivation flashed before my eyes without reservation. When I first saw these scenes, I was still thinking about the meaning of the scenes in the light. Could it be that by looking back on my life, I could comprehend the will of the heavens? However, as the scenes flowed, my mind was completely immersed in them. I forgot to think about the meaning behind them, and even forgot where I was. My gaze and thoughts completely followed the flow of the scenes. When I saw my parents taking me to the city to go to the market when I was a child, my heart was filled with joy. When I saw my relatives getting old and separated from each other, my heart was filled with sadness. When I saw my playmates leaving me to study, my heart was filled with melancholy. When I saw my parents die in the hands of the Liu family, my heart was filled with anger. I didn't know how long it had been. After watching my life as if I was watching a movie, the light in front of me disappeared. I looked around and found that I was no longer in Chiyo's tomb. Liu Jinyang, Wang Can, and the others weren't around me. I wasn't even myself anymore, but a naked baby. After a while, a familiar figure appeared in front of me. Her warm eyes gazed at me, and she held me tightly in her arms. It was my mother. Only then did I realize that I seemed to have returned to my childhood. Then, I seemed to have gone through my life again. Because I had just seen my life through the light, everything was still fresh in my memory. It was as if I was a prophet. From my birth to my adulthood, I walked through my life clearly and confusedly. The process seemed to be very slow, but it also seemed to be very fast. Although I knew everything about the future, I was still confused. I could only subconsciously follow my memories. Gradually, I grew up, met Lao AI, obtained the Death Scripture, and began to cultivate. Step by step, I went from searching for dragons to sealing acupoints, from glorious knowledge to consummation, and finally to Chiyo's tomb. I entered the blood door and began to break through to the heavenly master realm. When the 10-colored light appeared in front of me again, I felt my body shake, and I became clear-headed. I didn't know if it was a dream or an illusion. I was still sitting cross-legged in the air, continuing to condense the heavenly master seal. I also understood that everything that had happened before was just an illusion. I was just trying to see through the secret of heaven from the light. I felt a sense of loss and emptiness. I didn't know if I'd seen through something or understood something. I also didn't know if I had peeped into the secret of heaven. At this moment, I didn't have time to think about it. Not far in front of me, the 10-colored light had already spread and formed 10-colored characters. Chapter 533. Innate Saint, I was dazed for a moment before I reacted. This was my celestial master seal. All of my worries were put to rest at this moment. The result was even better than what I had expected. Not only was my word count no lower than Lu Jinyang's, the meaning of my words was even better than his. Heaven was the supreme being. As for life, it was written in the book of rights and fortune. A man lives freely, but lives unrestrainedly. This was used to distinguish the difference between people. After that, the word saint, when taken apart, was interlinked with the word heavenly, meaning that the saint was the heavens. Man is the heart of heaven and earth, the end of the 5 elements, the taste of food, sound, and beauty. Birds, beasts, insects, and trees are all born of the heaven and earth, but cannot be the heart of the heaven and earth. Only man is the heart of the heaven and earth. Therefore, everything in the world is extremely precious. The heart of heaven and earth was also known as man, and it could harmonize with heaven and earth. The heart of fruit was also known as man. It could resurrect the black tree and turn it into a fruit. They were all small, yet they contained the whole. Therefore, heaven is a saint, and life is a human. I cultivate the Tao and Shaman Qi. Now that I have become a celestial master, the Tao and Shaman Qi are both perfected. The celestial master vital essence is a combination of the Tao and Shaman Qi. The celestial master seal is also a combination of the Tao and Shaman Qi. Therefore, the 4 words innate saint were half made from Taoist Qi and the other half from Shaman Qi. After a short moment, the 4 words formed by the 10-colored light scattered and gathered above my head, forming a seal. I didn't directly store it in my body. Instead, I extended my hand to take it down and observed it. The seal was 3 inches long, just like Officer Wong's seal. But the difference was that my seal wasn't milky white. It had 2 colors, half of which was black and the other half was milky white. In the middle of the seal, there was a clear dividing line. I turned the seal over and looked at the writing underneath. Similarly, the bottom of the seal was also black and white. On the left side, the word Tiansheng was milky white, and on the right side, the word sage was thick black. A very long time ago, when I saw Tai Sui's corpse transform into a dragon vein at the underground dragon vein in Shenzhen, I knew that while the Taoist and Shaman Qi seemed to be completely different, they were actually of the same origin. Now that he saw my seal, he understood this logic even more clearly. Innate was saint, and saint was innate. Even though there was a clear distinction between black and white, the meaning of each word was exactly the same. However, this distinct black and white seal made me recall the time when I was in glory of consciousness. In that illusion, I had crossed the river and brought darkness to the world. Since black and white were of the same origin, why were they so frightened? I remembered their kowtow, the way they cut their bodies with knives and used their blood to worship. I suddenly understood. Although black and white came from the same source, people were ignorant. How could they understand? Just like the people in the illusion, they could only look at the darkness in the distance in fear. They could only pray and sacrifice their lives to the heavens so that they could stay in the daylight. But he didn't know that the so-called night and day were only the 2 sides of my body. At that time, I thought that I was the darkness, but now I understand that was not the case. Behind me was the darkness, and in front of me was the day. Everyone in the illusory world was afraid of being swallowed by the darkness behind me. They hated me, but they didn't know that the reason they were in the daytime was because I was facing them. If I turned around, black would become white, and white would become black. Therefore, there were only 2 ways to get rid of those people's hatred. The first way was that I couldn't separate black and white with my body. Instead, I had to merge the black and white into one. If the black and white were no longer distinct, there would be no concept of black and white, and naturally, there would be no hatred. The black and white were the two chi of witchcraft in my body. The terrified people were the people in the metaphysics world who wanted to kill me. The two chi of witchcraft and witchcraft were deeply planted in my body. I couldn't give up on either of them. Only one day, when I could merge the chi of witchcraft and chi of Tao into one, those people might not treat me as an anomaly. Other than that, there was another way. Back in the illusion, there was a rainbow light on the other side of the river. There was an old man in the rainbow light. The ignorant people prayed to him because they were afraid of the darkness. They sacrificed their lives and blood. If I replaced the old man and let the people know that regardless of day or night, they were all bestowed by me, they would kneel and serve me, begging for my bestowment. Similarly, there would be no hatred. By then, even if I shrouded them in the darkness, they could only crawl on the ground and endure everything in silence. I didn't know who the old man was, but I knew that it was impossible for me to replace the old man with my current cultivation. Not to mention anything else, I wasn't a match for the 10 celestial masters who had besieged me in the back mountain of the metaphysics world. If I wanted to replace the old man, I would have to wait until my cultivation reached the peak. No matter what method I used, it was still too far away for me. Only by diligently cultivating could I plan for the future. I shook my head and put these thoughts aside for the time being. With a slight thought, I put the seal back into my body. Then, my body slowly floated down to the ground. After my celestial master seal had condensed, the blood fog had reappeared and covered the entire War God Mountain. So when I was close to the ground, I could see clearly that among the people standing under the high platform, Officer Wong, the Fat Father and Son, Ah Fu, Ah Shou, and several others were kneeling on the ground. They raised their heads and looked at me. Seeing them like that, I suddenly recalled what Officer Wong had told me. The Nine Cauldrons clan's duty was to guard the sages. They were the servants of the sages. Since I had the word sage in my celestial master seal, it was obvious that they had recognized me as a sage. In fact, they weren't the only ones who thought so. After listening to Officer Wong's words about the so-called sage, I also had my doubts. However, when I saw the Wong family's great power, I felt that it was unimaginable. So I denied it. But after condensing the seal, I realized that this kind of thinking wasn't that unimaginable. The Nine Cauldrons clan had the word sage in their seal, so there must be a connection between them. Most importantly, the Nine Cauldrons clan was the only cultivators in the world who cultivated sorcery energy. There was an inexplicable connection between me and sorcery energy. From this, I could infer that the sage wasn't a fantasy. After I landed on the ground, I didn't wait for Officer Wong's voice to ring out. Long live the sage. Holy Spirit guard Wong, King greets the sage. After saying that, he bent down and kowtowed continuously. The rest of the people also said, "Greetings to the sage." Then they kowtowed together. Although I had begun to accept this explanation, I still felt uncomfortable when I saw Officer Wong, who had been talking and laughing with me, kneeled down, and Lin Aching, who I had regarded as an elder, kowtowed. I said, "Although my seal has the word sage in it, it's still unclear whether I'm the sage that Brother Wong mentioned." "Brother Wong, you don't have to bow to me." As soon as I said that, Officer replied excitedly, "Reporting to the sage, when you condense the seal, the bloodline of the Nine Cauldrons clan clearly transmitted the message of the sage's arrival. This is the bloodline memory inherited from the antiquity. There's no need to identify it. You are the sage." I was shaken. This time, I didn't doubt him anymore. The saint he was talking about was really me. After Officer Wong said that, he still looked excited. He bent down and continued to kowtow. After he had kowtowed 9 times, he got up and said respectfully, "I didn't know the sage's identity before. Please punish me for my rudeness." I was extremely embarrassed. After a moment of silence, I tried to adapt to my current identity. I shook my head and said, "You don't have to do that." "Wong, Ken, you're the commander of the Holy Spirit Guard and an old friend of mine. Just treat me as an elder brother. Officer Wong hesitated and didn't agree. I urged him a few times before he finally agreed. He raised his head and looked at me, smiling cautiously. Although he had agreed to treat me as an elder brother, he didn't change the way he addressed me. He insisted on not calling me Brother Zhou. He said that if he called me anything else, it would be a blasphemy against the sage and against the Wong family's rules. I had no choice but to let him do as he pleased. After talking to Officer Wong, I turned to talk to the fat man and his son. Compared to Officer Wong, I was more embarrassed when facing them. One was my childhood playmate, while the other was my neighbor's uncle. It was hard for me to adapt to this change in identity. However, with Officer Wong as an example, the two followed suit. They didn't kneel, but insisted on addressing me as an elder brother. After dealing with this matter, I raised my head and looked at Lu Jinyang, who wasn't far from me. After receiving Chiyo's inheritance, the hatred in Lu Jinyang's eyes had decreased a lot. It seemed he didn't put me in his eyes anymore. But this time, when our eyes met, Lu Jinyang's eyes glowed with red light. The resentment in his eyes was even thicker than before. I understood that Lu Jinyang had sensed the threat and was afraid of me. Although Chiyo's inheritance was powerful, my inborn Saint Seal and the Wong family's attitude towards me were more threatening than the sense of security that Chiyo's inheritance had given him. I smiled and moved my eyes away from him. I turned around and called the fat man. There's only one door left. Don't delay. Hurry up and get in. The fat man nodded and cupped his hands to greet me. Then he walked to the high platform. Every time someone entered the previous blood doors, they had to follow Lu Jinyang's instructions. It was the same for me when I entered. But now, I didn't even look at him and directly arrange things. It was true that Lu Jinyang had the blood spirit guards, but they couldn't do anything to us. Moreover, the Wong family's reinforcements would arrive soon. After Chiyo's inheritance was over, the blood spirit guards wouldn't stay for long. That was why I didn't care about him anymore. Chapter 534. I didn't put Lu Jinyang in my eyes. After the fatty went up, Officer Wong brought Ah Fu and the others to guard me in case Lu Jinyang got angry and attacked me. However, even after the fatty entered the blood door, Lu Jinyang didn't move. He didn't even say anything, let alone attack me. It was obvious that he understood the situation just like me. He wasn't as arrogant as before. I smiled and didn't turn to look at him. My eyes were fixed on the high platform. The fatty had entered the last blood door. At this moment, all the blood doors on the high platform had disappeared, including the divination unraveling that had turned into a blood door. The people who had entered the previous 5 doors had obtained extraordinary things. What would the fatty get in the last door? Even though Fatty and I were childhood friends, we didn't interact much after we embarked on the path of cultivation. I only knew that he was an important disciple of the Zhanshe faction. His eyes had the image of the sun and the moon, which was extraordinary. But as for the specifics of his cultivation, other than divination and the ability to set up formations, I'm not sure how his strength compares to that of ordinary cultivators like us. That was why I couldn't guess what he would get in this trip. I could only wait in silence. I didn't have to wait for too long before I sensed some movement. It wasn't the reappearance of the blood door or the fatty's return. It was the war god mountain that we were standing on. It suddenly shook and rumbled. I frowned. When Lu Jinyang had entered and received Chiyo's inheritance, the situation outside had also changed drastically. Now it was the same. Could it be that Chiyu hadn't passed all of his inheritance to Lu Jinyang and that he had left a part for the fatty? Just as I was thinking, the movement beneath my feet intensified. It was as though there was an earthquake on War God Mountain. The platform we were standing on suddenly surged and tossed us high up into the air. I hurried to grab the fox girl behind me. When I was about to turn around and grab Lin Aching, Officer Wong dashed forward and held Lin Aching's body. Only the two of them were not Taoist masters here, so it would be difficult for them to protect themselves in the great changes of heaven and earth. I lowered my head to take a look. After throwing us out, the War God Mountain suddenly caved in. In an instant, it had sunk by at least a few dozen meters. Thus, we were currently flying almost 100 meters in the air. Even the platform where the blood gate was located had sunk deep into the ground along with the war god mountain. Who knew how Fatty was doing inside the blood gate? This commotion was far greater than what Lu Jianyang had caused. If Chio's inheritance had really been split into two, then Fatty might have obtained more opportunities. However, after I turned my head to look at Lu Jianyang, I got rid of this thought. There wasn't any worry on Lu Jianyang's face. He was just a little bewildered and a little angry. It was obvious that his mind was still on me, and he didn't pay much attention to the Fatty. Only Lu Jianyang knew whether Chio's inheritance was complete or not. He was not a person who could remain calm despite being shocked by lightning. If Fatty really got his inheritance, he would not be so calm. More importantly, the Chiyu statue next to the War God Mountain had also cracked. It didn't look as magical as when it had turned around to look at the mountain. Thus, this earth-shattering change didn't seem to have anything to do with Fatty inside the blood gate. However, if it wasn't caused by Fatty, what was the cause? Could it be that the blood coffin also had an earthquake? As a beginner Heavenly Master Realm expert, he couldn't fly for a long time, let alone carry someone. Wang Qian and I didn't hold on for a long time. We left the Fox Girl and Lin Aching to Ah Fu and Asho to take care of. During this process, the War God Mountain under us was still shaking and surging. We couldn't find a place to stand. For the time being, we could only hover in the air and didn't dare to land. Originally, I thought that the earth-shattering situation wouldn't last for long before it stopped. However, who knew that after struggling for a few minutes, the commotion below didn't stop. Instead, it became even more intense. After the War God Mountain continued to tumble and fall, it seemed as though it was collapsing. Countless rocks rolled down, and the entire mountain broke into countless pieces, turning it into a pile of rubble. As for the Chiyu statue on the side of the mountain, it had completely collapsed and turned into a pile of rubble. The majestic and arrogant aura of the statue had vanished. Such a horrifying scene made our hearts go cold. If we were to land now, the Heavenly Masters would be injured in such a terrifying situation. Our lives might even be in danger. Since they couldn't fall, the true essence in their bodies couldn't support them to fly for a long time. In desperation, Ah Fu and Asho had to hold the Fox Girl and Lin Aching, and they had to spare some energy to take care of me and Wang Qian. Not far from us, Lu Jianyang and his two Heavenly Masters were floating in the air. The difference was that Lu Jianyang and his two Heavenly Masters had just reached the Heavenly Master Realm, so it was difficult for them to fly. Not far from them were the 9 blood spirit guards. Although they were floating in the air, they didn't come over to take care of them. That was why the 3 of them were having a hard time. Not long after that, the Heavenly Master who had obtained a pair of wings from the blood door spread his wings. After flapping them a few times, he seemed to have found the trick. He flapped his wings to stabilize his body. At the same time, he grabbed Lu Jianyang and the other Heavenly Master. Only then did the 3 of them relax. Just as I was about to retract my gaze from them, I suddenly noticed that the blood color of the blood spirit guards, who were floating motionlessly at the side, seemed to have dimmed significantly. I turned my head to look around. Not only the blood spirit guards, but the blood light in the sky had also dimmed. It was a world of difference from before. However, we had been so shocked by the collapsing mountain that we hadn't noticed it. As my thoughts flickered, the blood light disappeared. The 9 blood spirit guards would disappear soon. Lu Jianyang's side didn't have the power to threaten us anymore. I heaved a sigh of relief. However, with Lu Jianyang's power, we couldn't do anything to him. We didn't need to think about killing him. What was more important was the Fatty situation. At this moment, the high platform on the War God Mountain had been shattered. We couldn't find the blood door. What was more frightening was that the blood door was related to the blood mist. At this moment, the blood mist was quickly dispersing. When the blood mist completely disappeared, who knew if the blood door would reappear? The Fatty situation was really worrying. However, even though I was burning with anxiety, I didn't have the ability to check. Ah Fu might have the ability to do so, but he and Asho had to take care of the 4 of us. What was even more terrifying was that the collapse of the mountains and the cracking of the earth continued. In addition to the continuous collapse of the ground below, an inexplicable wind blew in the surroundings. This wind was extremely violent, and as soon as it blew, the blood mist that was left behind instantly dissipated. The 9 blood spirit guards beside Lu Jinyang also vanished in almost an instant. Even though Ah Fu and Ah Shou had the Yang God, celestial master cultivation, they couldn't control their bodies. They had to use all of their power to protect us. As for Lu Jinyang's side, even though he had mystical wings, the heavenly master was still unfamiliar with using them because he had just obtained them. When a strong wind started, he was directly blown away and disappeared along with Lu Jinyang and the heavenly master. Wang Can shouted at me, "Sage, the wind is getting more violent. We shouldn't stay here for long. We have to leave while Ah Fu and Ah Shou still have some power. Otherwise, we don't know what will happen next." I stooped to look down. Amidst the raging wind, I didn't see any information about the fatty. Wongan was right. This great change seemed to have no end. No one knew what would happen next. Logically speaking, we had to get out of here as soon as possible. But did we really have to leave the fatty behind? I turned to look at Lin Aching in Ah Fu's hand. Before I could say anything, Uncle Lin said, "He's right. We have to get out of here first." Since Lin Aching had said so, I gritted my teeth and didn't hesitate. I ordered to break out of the encirclement. Ah Fu and Ah Shou's strength was great. Even in such a bad situation, they still carried us against the wind. After a long time of trekking, we finally crossed the sky above the blood maple forest and found the exit of the blood coffin. Wongan was right. When we arrived at the exit of the blood coffin, the situation inside was even worse. Not only was the wind raging, but the earth and the sky seemed to have turned upside down. Countless stones floated in the air. The sky and the earth seemed to have merged into one. It was hard to imagine what would have happened if we hadn't come out. Ah Fu and Ah Shou used the last of their strength to bring us out of the blood coffin. The inside and the outside of the blood coffin were 2 different worlds. After we got out of the coffin, the wild wind disappeared and the earth-shattering sound disappeared. Chapter 535. Our countenances changed. Although the situation inside the blood coffin was terrifying, it was just a disaster that could shatter the mountains and crack the earth. It didn't attack us. Although it looked terrifying, we had all escaped and no one was hurt. But this sudden gust of wind rushed straight towards the fox girl and took her away. Instinctively, we ran away. When we were dozens of meters away from the blood coffin, we felt a little relieved. I lifted my head to look at the door of the blood coffin. Although it was far away, I could still hear the tsunami-like noise inside. I couldn't help but feel sad. When we were inside the blood coffin, even with my heavenly master realm cultivation base, I couldn't protect myself. The fox girl's power was just at the glorious era. I was afraid that she wouldn't be able to escape after being sucked in. In order to repay their kindness, Li Linshi and his wife had asked the fox girl to stay with me and help me get the 7-star mugwort from the Green Mountains country. Now, we hadn't gotten the 7-star mugwort, and the fox girl had an accident. How could I explain this to Li Linshi and his wife? Also, there was Wang Li. Without the fox girl, he couldn't get the 7-star mugwort. Wang Li's condition was getting worse. After thinking about this, I couldn't help but feel regretful. If I had known this earlier, I wouldn't have taken the fox girl to the Qiyu tomb. At that time, I thought that there were only Liang Tianxin and Xiao Sigue. I didn't expect that so many people would appear. Even the Yang God Celestial Master had appeared. Everything was beyond my expectation. While I was blaming myself, Officer Wang suddenly screamed, "Everybody be careful. Another gust of wind is coming." I lifted my head to look at the entrance of the blood coffin. Sure enough, another gust of air rolled out of the door. However, this time, it didn't come for us. Instead, it circled around the entrance and hit the ground, making a loud noise and stirring up a lot of dust. As soon as I heaved a sigh of relief, I looked through the dust and saw several flows of air coming out of the blood coffin. They didn't seem to have any pattern. Some of them hit the ground, while others were sent far away. Some of them hit the stone walls with carvings of the 12 zodiac animals. The tremendous force created cracks on the walls, destroying several carvings of the zodiac animals. The sand and dust had almost covered the entire area. However, as heavenly masters, all of us had extremely good eyesight. Through the dust, we could still see the violent air currents surging out from the entrance of the blood coffin. It was obvious that the calamity within the blood coffin could no longer be stopped and would soon spread outside. Wonkin was the first to speak anxiously. "We can't stay here for a long time. We have to get out of here as soon as possible." Then, he urged Ah Fu and Ah Shou to lead the way, ready to leave this place. However, Lin Aching didn't move, and neither did I. Earlier, he had fled to the outside of the blood coffin because he had subconsciously faced the apocalyptic situation inside. However, if they continued to escape, they would have to leave Chiyo's tomb. What about Fatty? He was still in the tomb. Lin Aching turned to look at me and said in a low voice, "Saint Zhou, leave with them first. I have to go in and look for my Huzi." He and his son were very close. When Fatty disappeared in the fire god temple, Lin Aching didn't hesitate to go in to look for him. He didn't care about the danger at all. How could he abandon Fatty now? I had been friends with Fatty since childhood. As long as I had a little hope, I didn't want to see anything happen to Fatty in front of me. However, when I looked up at the blood coffin, I sighed inwardly. It was different from the fire god temple. Although there were hidden dangers in the fire god temple, as long as you were lucky, you could avoid them. However, the scene in front of us was like the end of the world. Let alone Lin Aching, as long as I was affected by the turbulence, I wouldn't be able to fight back. I was afraid that I would be smashed into pieces in an instant. If I went back, I wouldn't be saving people, but sending myself to death. Seeing my hesitation, Wang Can suggested, "The situation inside is too dangerous. Uncle Lin, you can't go back." How about this? Previously, Wang Can regarded Lin Aching as his peer. After confirming his identity as a saint, he called him Uncle Lin. He pointed at Ah Fu and Ah Shou and said, "Let's go out and find a safe place to stay. I'll ask Ah Fu and Ah Shou to go in again to see if they can find Brother Lin Hu. I promise that as long as Brother Lin Hu appears, Ah Fu and Ah Shou will bring him back. What do you think?" Although he asked Lin Aching, his eyes were fixed on me. Obviously, he was asking for my opinion. With Ah Fu and Ah Shou's cultivation base, they might have a chance to come out alive if they went in. However, I couldn't agree to do that. No one knew whether Fatty was dead or alive. I couldn't let them risk their lives just because of a slim hope. Although they were servants of the Wang family and obeyed Officer Wang's words, there was no need for them to sacrifice themselves for nothing. Although I didn't agree, I couldn't say it out loud. Lin Aching was standing next to me, and Wang Can had already said it. If I refused, Lin Aching would feel even more desperate. While I was hesitating, Lin Aching shook his head and said to Wang Can, "It's not necessary. Although the two heavenly masters have high cultivation bases, I know what's going on inside. I'm afraid their cultivation bases won't help. As I said, you go first. I'll go in and have a look. If I can find him, I'll find him. If I can't, we can stay here and keep him company." His voice was calm, but it was obvious that he was ready to die. I couldn't bear to see him die. After thinking for a while, I said, "Uncle Lin, don't be too pessimistic. Fatty has been lucky since he was a child. Over the years, he has encountered many dangers, but he survived each one. Maybe this time, it won't be so dangerous. Don't forget that when the disaster happened, Fatty was still in the blood door. Based on the situation I encountered in the blood gate is a completely separate space from the outside world. The berserk calamity outside might not necessarily affect the inside." Lin Aching nodded indifferently. It's possible. Although he agreed with me, his attitude didn't change. He still insisted on going back. Feeling helpless, I gritted my teeth and turned to Ah Fu. I whispered, "Take Uncle Lin and leave first." Ah Fu was stunned, but he quickly understood what I meant. He didn't say anything and moved to Lin Aching's side in a flash. He extended his hand and pressed on his shoulder. Lin Aching didn't have time to react. He closed his eyes and slumped down. Ah Fu picked him up and led the way out. The rest of us didn't hesitate and follow behind him. Just like when we came here, we first walked out of the cave where the blood coffin was and went to the huge, empty cave outside. It was relatively calm here, but since there was nothing blocking the two places, it wouldn't take long for the raging wind to spread to this place. Thus, we didn't stop and walked all the way out of the cave. After we walked out of the huge bronze door with Chio's statue engraved on it, and saw that the bronze door was closed, we stopped and rested on the spot. After we stopped, I was worried that Lin Acheng would wake up and cause a ruckus again. I searched his body and prepared to take out his bronze cauldron. The door in front of us couldn't be opened without a bronze cauldron. However, after searching for a while, I didn't find any small cauldron on him. I guessed his small cauldron was with the fatty. Just now, Fu had used his true essence to temporarily seal Lin Acheng's divine sense. Not long after he stopped to rest, he woke up. After he understood the situation, he didn't make any noise. He just silently walked to the outside of the bronze gate, sat cross-legged, and stared at the gate. It seemed that he was waiting for the fatty to come back. Looking at his behavior, my heart tightened with sorrow, not only for the fatty, but also for the little fox girl. Just as I had said, the fatty was inside the blood door, so he might have had a chance to escape. However, when the little fox girl was sucked in, she would have had to face the violent turbulence. She wouldn't have had a chance to escape. She would have already died. Our trip had been smooth. Although we had encountered Lu Jinyang, whose power had increased a lot, we hadn't suffered any losses. However, we hadn't expected that such a big accident would happen just as we were about to leave. I want to talk to Lin Acheng. He didn't show much emotion, but he couldn't hide the sadness in his eyes. I'm going to sit here and wait until the fatty comes out. Our hope was slim, but in this situation, besides waiting, there was nothing else we could do. I hesitated for a while, then decided to stay here and wait with Lin Acheng. Of course, I couldn't wait forever. After a while, I would find a way to get in and see. If it was quiet inside, I would search around to see if I could find the fatty or his remains. If it was still the same after a long time, I would have to forcefully take Lin Acheng away. I had made up my mind, and Officer Wong and the others wouldn't refuse. We stayed here. Officer Wong also asked Fu to buy some daily necessities for us for the next few days. According to my original plan, I was prepared to wait for half a month. However, who would have thought that the bronze gate would suddenly open early the next morning? I lifted my head and saw a familiar figure walking out. It was none other than Fatty Hai. Fatty wasn't the only one who walked out with a smile on his face. The fox girl's slim figure also appeared behind him, following closely behind him. The two of them had survived. Moreover, their clothes were neat and tidy, and they looked energetic. They didn't even have a scratch on them. Chapter 536. I hurried to greet him. After checking that the fat man and the vixen were all right, I asked him, "What did you encounter in there? Why did you come out and skate?" Fatty's expression was a little strange. He glanced at Officer Wong and the others, who were walking behind me, and grinned. We didn't encounter anything. We just walked out of the blood door and met the fox girl. We took her out with us. Oh, and your big dog. We also beat them out. Big dog? I was bewildered and followed the fat man's finger. It was the Kirin that had come out of the blood door with me. When we were in the blood coffin, everything happened so fast that I didn't have time to care about it. After we got out, I was so focused on the fat man that I had forgotten about the Kirin. At first, the Kirin was also looking in my direction. When I turned my head and our eyes met, the Kirin raised his head and rolled his eyes. He looked away with an arrogant expression. The fat man came out unscathed, and I felt much better. I cheerfully walked over and rubbed the Kirin's head. The Kirin seemed to hold a grudge against me. He moved aside as if he didn't want me to touch him. However, he squatted at my feet like a dog and didn't move an inch. Although this little guy didn't have any special abilities, he was smart. It would be good to keep him as a pet. Except for the horn on his head, which was a little eye-catching, he didn't look any different from a dog. When I went to check on the Kirin, Lin Acheng, Officer Wong, and the others had surrounded the fat man and asked him what had happened inside. The fat man didn't tell me the details and just grinned. Later, he told me that there was no storm inside. Officer Wong suggested that we go back and check. On the one hand, we could find Lu Jinyang and the others. On the other hand, we could go back and study the storm. I had the same idea, so I nodded and was ready to take them back. However, the fat man stopped me and said awkwardly, "We can't get in there now. There's nothing in the blood coffin." "There's nothing left?" Officer Wong and I looked at each other. We didn't know what the fat man meant. After asking him, Fatty stuttered and couldn't explain clearly. In the end, he stomped his feet and said, "Forget it. You guys should go back and watch it. You'll know when you see it." This Fatty was strange. Apparently, he was hiding something from us. However, considering our relationship, he must have a reason to keep it from me. I didn't ask more questions. I turned around and called Officer Wong and the others. We reopened the bronze gate and walked in. After entering, it was just as Fatty had said. There were no remnants of the storm in the tomb. Even the surrounding stone walls could not be seen. While observing, I walked forward. After 20 or 30 steps, a stone wall appeared in front of me. It was the end of the tomb. No. I clearly remembered that after we passed through the bronze gate, we had to go through a cave on the other side of the mountain wall. It was hundreds of meters high and thousands of meters long. Moreover, if we wanted to go to the other chamber where the blood coffin was, we would have to go through a cave on the other side of the mountain wall that faced the bronze gate. But now we had only entered for about 20 meters, and there was actually a whole mountain wall in front of us. Could it be that the storm had loosened a boulder and blocked this chamber? Or was the storm so powerful that it created an earthquake that completely changed the appearance of this chamber? I reached out and touched the mountain wall in front of me. I walked around and eliminated these two guesses. Whether it was a boulder that had been blown here by the storm or a geological change caused by the earthquake, the new mountain wall should have been created from somewhere else. I could see some traces on the exposed surface. However, after observing for a long time, I found that the stone wall in front of me was blended with the surroundings. Moreover, it didn't look any different from the other places. It was dark and looked as if it had existed for thousands of years. I studied it for a long time, but I couldn't find any clues. Officer Wong also came to check, but he didn't find anything suspicious. He turned around and looked at me in dismay. Since I couldn't find any clues, I turned around and asked the Fatty. The Fatty rolled his eyes. "I don't know. It was like this when we got out." Since he didn't want to tell me, I didn't know what to do. Officer Wong suggested, "Although there's a mountain wall here, I'm sure the chamber is still there. It's just hidden behind a mountain wall. Why don't we ask Ah Fu to break the entire mountain wall or create a cave for people to pass through? Then we can go there together." His suggestion made sense. I turned around and looked at the Fatty. He wore an indifferent face and didn't respond to Officer Wong's suggestion. I agreed with him. Officer Wong called Ah Fu and told him something. Then he gave him the black Qingshu sword. Ah Fu nodded and didn't say anything. He walked to the stone wall and raised the Qingshu sword in his hand. I didn't see him make any hand seals to cast a spell, but he simply stabbed the sword into the mountain wall in front of him. The power of a young god heavenly master was extraordinary. After the Qingshu sword was stabbed, I felt the ground under my feet shake. Then I heard a rumbling sound as if there was an earthquake. Then, with a bang, the mountain wall in front of Fu burst open. From the place where the Qingshu sword had stabbed in, countless cracks appeared in the surrounding like a spider web. Then, countless gravel fell down, and a cave as tall as a person appeared out of thin air. After the gravel fell, Officer Wong was the first one to enter the cave to check. A few seconds later, he came out again. He looked incredulous. He pointed at the cave and said to me, "It's 7 or 8 meters inside, but it's still stone. The stone wall hasn't been penetrated yet." 7 or 8 meters, and it's still stone? I raised my head and looked at the area of the stone wall in front of me. It was 7 or 8 meters thick. If it was really a stone wall created by a storm, it would be much bigger than the Tai Sui. The density of a stone was about 3 tons per cubic meter. I guess the stone wall in front of me weighed more than hundreds of thousands of tons. While I was still hesitating, Officer Wong wasn't convinced. He turned to Ah Fu and said, "You go inside and keep digging." I don't believe it. Since Officer Wong had given his order, Ah Fu wouldn't refuse. Without hesitation, he took the Qingshu sword and got into the cave. Not long after, there was another muffled sound. This time, before Officer Wong could go inside to check, Ah Fu came out. He shook his head at Officer Wong and me. I've dug more than 10 meters deep, but it's still stone. If it was a 7-meter thick stone wall blocking the way, I could believe it. However, I had dug more than 20 meters deep, and it was still stone. It couldn't have been caused by a stone wall or an earthquake. Combined with the previous discoveries, it was obvious that the stone wall had always been there. It wasn't a stone wall, but the surrounding mountains. How could this be? The huge chamber, the small chamber, the blood coffin, and the blood door. Was everything fake? Was it an illusion? I turned to look at the Qilin and closed my eyes to feel the Heavenly Master's true essence in my body. Everything was real. It was an illusion. But how could I explain the stone wall? Officer Wong and I looked at each other in puzzlement. After a moment of silence, I turned to look at the fat man. He was still grinning and didn't seem to want to explain anything to me. Feeling helpless, I sighed and called Officer Wong and the others. Together, we left the graveyard and returned to the Bronze Gate. Not far from the gate was the tunnel that Liang Tianxin and Xiao Sigue had dug. On the other side of the tunnel, there was another tunnel. It was surrounded by fresh soil, which Officer Wong and the others had dug when they came in. Liang Tianxin had set up 2 searchlights here. When the searchlights were turned on, the Bronze Gate was illuminated, but the places where the light couldn't reach were dark. That was why the 2 of them hadn't found this tunnel before. As for the fat man and his son, they had found the tunnel that Officer Wong had dug and followed them here. We walked through the tunnel that Liang Tianxin had dug and returned to the surface. We booked several rooms in the hotel I had stayed in before. Although it was early in the morning when they came out, they had been tense in Chiyo's tomb. Moreover, they had encountered many things in succession, so their bodies were already exhausted. So, after they settled down, they returned to their rooms and prepared to rest. Although I was also tired, I didn't sleep. Instead, I called the little fox girl and asked her what had happened after the storm in Chiyo's tomb took her back. The little fox girl looked confused. After I got sucked into the storm, I fainted and didn't remember anything. When I woke up, the fat man was already next to her. He asked her to leave with us. She didn't remember anything else. Unlike the fat man, who seemed to be hiding something from me, the little fox girl looked confused. She was telling the truth. It seemed she didn't know anything. I shook my head and was about to ask her to go back to rest. However, the little fox girl mumbled, "I don't know why, but after I got out of that place, I seemed to have become stronger." "What do you mean?" I didn't understand at first, so I asked in reply. The little fox girl raised her right hand, and a mass of crimson power gushed out, forming a crimson halo in her palm. She didn't need to explain to me. Earlier in Guangzhou, her mother had told me that Yao Yao's cultivation base was at the early stage of glorious memory. The monster race could only transform into a human when they reached the celestial master realm. However, because of the uniqueness of the Qing Qiu clan, they could transform at the glorious memory realm. Moreover, I had fought with Yao Yao at that time. She was indeed at the early stage of glorious memory, but I had defeated her with a wave of my hand. But now, looking at the mass of monster energy in her hand, she had at least reached the complete stage of glorious memory. She was only a step away from the celestial master realm. Chapter 537. To go from the initial stage of glory of knowledge to the complete stage of glory of knowledge in just one night, it was just a step away from becoming a celestial master. This sounded like a fantasy. Even if one swallowed an entire true dragon vein, it wouldn't be possible. I hurriedly asked Yao Yao what happened. In the end, she looked confused and told me that she didn't know. She only realized that something was wrong after she woke up. At that time, she only felt that the monster power in her body was abundant, but she didn't think much about it. After returning to the hotel, she activated her monster power to test it out. She was shocked too. Looking at how pale her face was, it was clear that she was quite frightened. Yao Yao was raised by Li Linshi and his wife at home since young. She didn't have any contact with the outside world, So she was originally timid. Encountering such a thing, she wasn't happy, but was scared instead. It was a normal thing. I frowned and thought for a long time, but I couldn't understand what was going on. In the end, I asked Yaya to sit down and checked her body. After confirming that everything was normal, I calmed down and comforted her gently before asking me to go back to sleep. After Yaya left, I laid on the bed and couldn't fall asleep. I closed my eyes and thought about what had happened. The fatty obviously knew about everything, but he was my friend. If he didn't say it, I couldn't force him. The only thing I was worried about was that his cultivation was low, so he wouldn't be able to make the right judgment. It was fine if what happened inside was good for him, but if it was bad and he couldn't figure it out, it would be troublesome if he was in danger. As I thought about it, I decided to find the fatty. I had to make sure if he was in danger. Just as I prepared to leave, there was a knock on the door. I walked over to open the door. The person who came was the fatty. He chuckled as he stood at the door and looked at me. This saved me the trouble of finding him. I let him in impatiently and closed the door. I pressed him down on the sofa. Without waiting for him to speak, I asked him directly, "Tell me what happened inside. Why did you hide it from me?" He came to find me secretly. It was obvious that he was prepared to tell me the truth, so I didn't stand on ceremony. The fatty laughed before I said anything. He grinned foolishly for a long time. When I lost my patience and wanted to punch him, he finally stopped laughing and asked me mysteriously, "Guess what I got from the last blood door?" "I guess." I slapped his head. "What am I guessing? What did you get? Hurry up and tell me. Don't waste my time." After being slapped by me, the fatty wasn't angry at all. Instead, he smiled even more happily. He squinted his eyes and said, "Take a guess. In any case, the blood door is filled with Chi-Yu's items." Lu Xingyang got Chiyo's heritage, the two Taoist masters got Chiyo's celestial devices, and Wang Can got Chiyo's divine power. I don't know about your Kylan, but what I got was also Chiyo's stuff. Guess what else Chi-Yu had besides those things? After he said that, I began to ponder. There was no need to mention Chiyo's divine power and Chiyo's inheritance. The Kirin was actually a goo insect that was tattooed on Chiyo's body. The two Chi-Yu instruments were also from Chiyo's statue. Of course, there was also Chiyo's axe. However, it was unknown why Lu Xingyang had obtained it in the Yinshang Royal Mausoleum. Apart from these, what else did Chi-Yu have? The legendary 81 brothers? And the great magus of the Jiuli tribe? But they were all living people. They couldn't be in the blood door, could they? After pondering for a long time, I couldn't figure out what it was. I impatiently sat down next to the fatty and said, "Don't waste time. Tell me what it is." The fatty wasn't in a hurry. He laughed and said, "Don't worry. Let me give you a hint. It's something similar to your Xian Yuan sword." I rolled my eyes. Something similar to the Xian Yuan sword? The Xian Yuan sword was one of the 10 great divine weapons in the antiquity time. If it was something similar to the Xian Yuan sword, could it be one of the 10 great divine weapons? I suddenly thought of something. Among the 10 great divine weapons in the antiquity time, there was an item called the Devil Refining Gourd, also known as the Jiuli Gourd. According to legend, after goddess Niwa created all kinds of creatures in the world, she found that most of the monsters in the world were ferocious and brutal. Thus, she created a bronze gourd that could purify their brutal aura. She wanted to use this gourd to refine the brutal monsters and other creatures to sublimate and maintain the harmony of the world. This bronze gourd was the Devil Refining Gourd. Since it was the sacred item of the Jiuli tribe, it was also called the Jiuli Gourd. Since it was called the Jiuli Gourd, and Chi-Yu is the ancestor of the Jiuli Gourd, it was highly possible that the Devil Refining Gourd was in Chi-Yu's hands. However, the 10 great divine weapons in the antiquity time were too mysterious, and Chi-Yu's legend didn't mention much about this item. That was why we didn't think about it when we were in the tomb. Now that the fatty had given me a hint, I finally remembered it. My heart raced. I gazed at the fatty and asked, "Is it a bronze gourd?" The fatty's grin became wider, and his mouth almost reached his ears. He nodded and said, "Yes, it's the Devil Refining Gourd." Haha, I suspected that the thing you gave me was an ancient divine weapon. I didn't expect that I'd get one after a few days. After he confirmed it, I finally understood why he had hidden it from me. It was one of the 10 great divine weapons in the antiquity time. Just like the last time the fatty had asked me, I didn't want to hide it from him. However, the Xian Yuan sword was so famous that I didn't know how to tell him. When the fatty came out, Officer Wong and the others were also there. Although I was sure that Officer Wong regarded me as his servant and treated the fatty as one of his own, from the fatty's point of view, Officer Wong was just a stranger that he had just met. Although he was a member of the Nine Cauldrons, it would take time for him to get to know him better and become his brother. At the same time, I couldn't help but sigh with emotion. The Devil Refining Gourd was also one of the 10 great divine weapons. Although its ranking was lower than the Xian Yuan sword, it was still one of the most precious treasures in this world. Previously, I had envied Lu Jinyang for getting Chiyo's inheritance, Officer Wong for getting Chiyo's divine power, and even the 2 heavenly masters, who were the worst among them, had each gotten a magical weapon. But now, it seemed that the one who had gained the most was the fatty who had entered the bloody door. Compared to the 10 great divine weapons, Chiyo's inheritance was nothing. I couldn't help but feel excited. I hurried to urge the fatty to take out the Devil Refining Gourd. However, the fatty waved his hand. I don't dare to take it out. My eyes can't stand it. I feel like I'm going to go blind if I look at it. I had almost forgotten that the fatty's eyes were too sharp. They couldn't stand the power of a divine weapon. I joked, "You can't use it or look at it. It seems the Devil Refining Gourd is useless to you." The fatty shook his head. "I can use it. As long as I don't take it out when I use it, I won't look at it. The Devil Refining Gourd is connected to my mind. I can use it even if I don't take it out." What? This time I was dumbfounded. The fatty could use the Devil Refining Gourd, and his mind was connected to mine? Why couldn't I use the Xian Yuan sword when I had it? I tried my best to use the 9 cauldrons, but I could barely use some sword energy. How could there be such a big gap between 2 people? He was so lucky that I was a little jealous. Of course, jealousy was just a joke. I was happy for him. What's the function of the Devil Refining Gourd? The fatty explained to me as if he was presenting a treasure. For the time being, I've only found one function. The Devil Refining Gourd has a massive space inside. As long as I use my mind, I can enter it at any time. Moreover, I can bring other people with me. The space inside the gourd can refine monsters, so I can use it. That's awesome. I can enter it at any time. Doesn't that mean I have another life-saving method? Moreover, I can even bring other people with me. If I ignore my cultivation base, I'll be an existence that defies the natural order. If I encounter a strong enemy, I can put him or her into the gourd. It's no different from killing the enemy. I asked for more details. However, the fatty wasn't sure himself, so I asked him to take it out and test me. Finally, he took out the Devil Refining Gourd and put on the table. He didn't dare to look at it and turned his head to the other side. I stooped to look at it. The Devil Refining Gourd didn't look eye-catching. It was just a small bronze gourd. The bottom of the gourd had 3 legs, and the head of a bull was engraved on the gourd. The gourd's belly had a thin neck, and on both sides of the neck were 2 sabers with 2 snake-like beasts. The lid was at the top of the gourd. Looking at the Devil Refining Gourd, I suddenly remembered that Chiyu had been holding a gourd like this in his hand when I had just arrived at Chiyo's tomb. However, I didn't think much about it at that time. Now, I understood that this Julie gourd belonged to Chiyu. It was normal that it had been left in the blood gate to wait for the fated one. As soon as I finished checking the Demon Refining Gourd, I suddenly felt a strong gust of wind around me. Before I could react, the scenery around me changed dramatically. I lifted my head and found that I wasn't in the hotel room anymore. I was now in the middle of a vast field. I couldn't see the end of the grassland, and the sky was filled with white air masses that also covered the entire sky. Besides me, the fatty wasn't far away from me. The sofa he was sitting on was still there. He turned around and looked at me with a smile. I pointed around. "Is this the inside of the Devil Refining Gourd?" The fatty grinned and nodded. Oh my God! Previously, he had said that the space inside was huge, but I didn't have any idea. Now that I looked around, I realized that this wasn't the space inside the gourd, but the world inside the gourd. If the fatty hadn't told me, I would have thought that I was in the real world, but the sun, moon, and stars in the sky were blocked by the thick white mist. What shocked me wasn't just the size of the space, but also the answer to another question. Although the fatty had obtained the devil refining gourd, his cultivation base hadn't increased. He was still in glory of consciousness realm, and there was a huge gap between us. However, when he had used the devil refining gourd to bring me in, I hadn't been able to resist at all. Hence, the function of the devil refining gourd could be confirmed to ignore one's cultivation base. This function was invincible. Compared to this function, my Xian Yuan sword wasn't even worth looking at. Of course, it was also because I couldn't control the Xian Yuan sword yet. One day, if I could completely control the Xian Yuan sword, its power would be even higher. When I came out, my head was still a little dizzy, and I was extremely jealous of the fatty. I talked to him for half a day about the miracles of the devil refining gourd. After I calmed down, I recalled the many questions I had, so I asked the fatty what happened. He told me that Chiyo's tomb was actually the devil refining gourd. The chamber that we had entered, including the blood coffin behind it, was the space inside the devil refining gourd. When he had entered the last blood door, and the devil refining gourd was in his hands, the space outside naturally couldn't be maintained anymore, so it collapsed. As for the little fox girl, the devil refining gourd had automatically sucked her into it after he had obtained it. The reason why the devil refining gourd was named devil refining was that it had the power to refine monsters. This time, when he had obtained the devil refining gourd had recognized him as its new master, so he had to go through the process of refining monsters. At that time, the little fox Yao Yao had been in the tomb, so she had naturally been sucked into the gourd to be refined. Yao Yao's sudden increase in power was naturally due to the devil refining gourd's refinement. It turned out that the meaning of devil refining was to increase the monster race's cultivation base. Fortunately, it was like that. Otherwise, if it had destroyed the monster beasts, I was afraid that Yao Yao would have died at that time. After listening to me, the fatty smiled and told me, in fact, the devil refining gourd can also destroy the monster beasts. It's all up to him. The little fox girl wasn't destroyed, and her cultivation base had increased. It was the result of his deliberate control. Chapter 538. After getting out of Chiyo's tomb, I needed to consider the trip to Qingxiu country. Although I had the little fox girl to accompany me, I didn't have much confidence. According to Yao Yao's mother, there were more than 10 foxes at the Celestial Master Realm in Qingxiu country. Their high priest and patriarch were even beyond the Celestial Master Realm. In front of such a powerful force, my cultivation base wasn't enough. If Yao Yao made a mistake, my plan would fail. There was no room for error. My original plan was to borrow Fu from Wang Can. If something went wrong, we wouldn't be in a passive position with Fu. However, it wasn't necessary now. As long as the fatty went with me, Qingxiu country wouldn't be a match for the monster refining gourd, no matter how strong they were. Moreover, the monster refining gourd had a miraculous effect on the monster race. It would be a good thing to use it to build a good relationship with the foxes of Qingxiu country. Although I didn't know why Wang Can and the others call me a saint, since they had formed the Holy Spirit Guard, I might as well recruit some new blood for the newly formed team. Qingxiu country's power was extraordinary, and they weren't known to the outside world. It was the most suitable size for them. After thinking for a while, I made up my mind. I asked the fatty if he was willing to go with me. The fatty had nothing to do, so he immediately agreed. However, after thinking for a while, he said that he needed to ask Lin Oching first. As long as his father was free, he could go with me. Although the fatty and his son were nominally my master from the bottom of my heart, I didn't really see them as servants. Of course, I wouldn't order them around. Hearing the fatty say this, I smiled and nodded. Let him go back and rest first. After resting, I would ask Uncle Lin for his opinion. Lin Oching knew that it was my idea, so he wouldn't purposely stop me. It was more or less confirmed. After the fatty left, I felt much more relaxed. I tried to remember the location of the Green Mountains country. Then, I prepared to sleep. However, I suddenly remembered the snake spirit and Tong Tong. I didn't feel sleepy anymore. I jumped out of bed. When I was in Chio's tomb, I couldn't contact the two kids. Later, the Kirin goo in my chest changed greatly. I didn't know if it affected the snake spirit or not. I hurriedly sent my consciousness inside and instantly sensed two familiar auras. My heart relaxed, and I gently called out to the two little fellows. As soon as I came out, Tong Tong covered her mouth and asked me, "Gidge, what have you been doing these days? You haven't called Tong Tong out." Contrary to Tong Tong's attitude, the snake spirit seemed to be busy with cultivation. It yawned listlessly and rubbed its eyes while muttering, "It has only been a few days. Can't you let me sleep well? Tell me, why did you call me out?" Seeing that the two of them were fine, I felt relieved. I didn't want to bother with the dumb snake spirit. I rubbed Tong Tong's head and was about to ask her if she had been cultivating these days and if her power had increased. However, before I could say anything, I heard a scream behind me. I turned around and saw that the spirit snake was bristling. It shrank back and pointed in front of it. Its eyes were wide open, and it didn't look as sleepy and lazy as before. I followed its finger and saw the Qilin squatting there, looking at the sky. It looked like it was looking down on everyone. I was a little surprised. The spirit snake was usually very arrogant. Why did it look so scared when it saw the Qilin? Anyway, the Qilin's appearance was really scary. When I first saw it, I was also scared. It felt good to use the Qilin to scare the spirit snake. However, when I looked at the Qilin's arrogant appearance, I couldn't help but feel angry. I pondered and walked over to pull the spirit snake to the Qilin's side. The spirit snake was really scared. It tried to shrink back. If my cultivation base hadn't reached the heavenly master realm, I wouldn't have been able to drag it. When I reached the Qilin's side, I patted its head. Then I turned to the spirit snake and said, "Look, it looks like a Qilin, but it doesn't have any abilities." It didn't even react when I patted its head. "What are you afraid of?" The spirit snake didn't answer. It still looked flustered and didn't dare to look at the Qilin. Its eyes kept darting to the side. I was angry. This fellow was usually arrogant. Even if I hit him, he wouldn't change. I didn't know if he was bewitched or something. I thought for a while and pulled its hand to the Qilin's head. I directly slapped it. The Qilin squatted there and didn't react. It just lowered its head and shot us a cold glance. After that glance, the spirit snake bristled again. It tried to retreat, its small face pale. I almost couldn't pull it back. When it finally calmed down, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I asked, "Aren't you usually fierce? It's just a big dog. Do you have to be this scared?" The spirit snake pulled a long face. After a long time, it finally said, "It's not a big dog. It's a Qilin." I slapped its head again. "So what if it's a Qilin? You're still a dragon." A Qilin is the leader of the four spirits. It's the descendant of a rain dragon. It's much stronger than a dragon. The spirit snake looked at me, the corners of its eyes shivering. According to the records, the four spirits were Qilin, Phoenix, Turtle, and Dragon. The Qilin was the leader. I had also heard about the descendant of a rain dragon. However, no matter how strong its ancestor was, it had nothing to do with the Qilin in front of us. I squatted down and explained to the spirit snake. It could be a Qilin, but it doesn't have any cultivation base. So what if it's a Qilin? You've turned into a flood dragon and have a heavenly master cultivation base. You can kill it with just one slap. What are you afraid of? After explaining, I patted its shoulder and continued, "I'm going to sleep. I'll leave this fellow to you. Don't you like to be someone's master? You should train him well and teach him something. Look at his head. When he's done, he could be a good mount. You can ride him. Think about it. How cool would it be to ride a Qilin?" Then, I didn't wait for the spirit snake to reject me. I directly pushed him toward the Qilin and went back to bed. I knew the spirit snake the best. Although he was so scared that he didn't look like a human now, when he calmed down, he would be very interested in the Qilin. Then, he would do his best to torture him. When it came to torturing people, the spirit snake would admit that he was second best. After being tormented by the spirit snake, I wanted to see if the little Qilin would dare to be so arrogant in the future. Tong Tong, who was standing next to me, seemed to be very interested in the Qilin. However, I was afraid that she would affect the spirit snake's fight with the Qilin, so I coaxed her to go back. Since my body was too tired, I quickly fell asleep after lying down. When I woke up, it was already the next morning. As soon as I opened my eyes, I heard a faint sound. It sounded like someone was panting. I couldn't help but smile. The spirit snake must be torturing the Qilin. It had been 1 day and 1 night since yesterday. I guessed that the spirit snake had tortured the Qilin until he was about to go crazy. When I sat up and turned around, I was dumbfounded. The Qilin was lying on the ground, sleeping. The spirit snake was kneeling next to him, holding a fan in his hand. He was fanning the Qilin. The panting sound I had heard earlier wasn't because he was panting. It was the sound of someone fanning the spirit snake. I guess the Qilin heard me sitting up. He opened his eyes and glanced at me. It seemed the spirit snake's fanning had made him cold. He impatiently waved his paw at the spirit snake. The spirit snake was frightened. He put down the fan and smiled at the Qilin. The Qilin moved his body and changed to a more comfortable position. He purposely glanced at me with a provocative look. It seemed he had seen through my thoughts and was disdainful of me. I was enraged. I jumped off the bed and slapped the spirit snake's head. I told you to train him, but you stayed here and fanned him for the whole night? The spirit snake didn't say anything and rubbed his head. He didn't look as arrogant as before. I understood now. The spirit snake couldn't control the Qilin. Quite the contrary, the Qilin was controlling him. If the spirit snake didn't listen to me, I could call the Qilin to deal with him. Unfortunately, the Qilin wasn't obedient. He wouldn't listen to me like Tong. Chapter 539. When I arrived at Wang Can's room, I knocked on the door and entered. I found that a large group of people had gathered in the room. Ah Fu and the fat father and son were there. In addition to them, there were 5 new faces that I had never seen before. Although I had never seen these people before, the power of insight in my body allowed me to sense that their cultivation was extraordinary. Although I couldn't find out the details, I could vaguely feel that their cultivation was higher than mine. I even felt that I was facing Ah Fu in front of 2 of them. I turned to look at Wang Can and asked, "Who are they?" Wang Can smiled. He got up and saluted me. Then he turned to the 5 people and said, "They're the sages. From today on, the Wang family will serve the Holy Spirit Guard and serve the sages. You are the servants of the Wang family. You will join the Holy Spirit Guard with the Wang family. In the future, you will serve the sages as well as the Wang family. Do you understand?" The 5 people cupped their hands together and said, "We will remember." Then they turned to me, knelt and kowtowed. "Greetings, sages." Earlier, Wang Can, Ah Fu, and the others had knelt and kowtowed to me, so I didn't feel so uncomfortable. After nodding, I waved my hand to let them get up. Then, Wang Can introduced them to me. These 5 people are the 5 servants of the metal, wood, water, fire, and earth family. They arrived here last night. The sages were resting, so I didn't take them to disturb them. I had already guessed who they were. After listening to Wang Can's introduction, I asked them about their realms. Wang Can told me that among the 5 people, 3 of them were at the Celestial Master realm, just 1 step away from the Yang God realm. The other 2 had entered the Yang God Celestial Master realm, which was similar to Ah Shou and Ah Shi. Sure enough, there were 2 Yang God Celestial Masters. The power of the Wang family was incredible. Since I'd been in contact with Wang Can, I had been very interested in the strength of the Wang family. Before, I could only guess, but now that our relationship had improved, I could ask him about it. So, I asked Wang Can directly. As the head of the Wang family, Wang Can was naturally familiar with this matter. He immediately said, "Among the servants of the Wang family, there are currently 8 Yang God Celestial Masters and 42 Seal Celestial Masters. Among the blood relatives, because our Wang family has never been prosperous since my grandfather's generation, there's been only 1 bloodline. So far, in Wangwu Cave, there are only 2 granduncles left. In terms of cultivation, they are above the Yang spirit. It's just that the 2 granduncles usually cultivate in seclusion and don't care about worldly affairs." Wang Can's voice was calm, but I was dumbfounded. There were dozens of Seal Celestial Masters, and the number of Yang God Celestial Masters was close to double. What was even more terrifying was that there were two granduncles above the Yang god. I'm afraid that not even all of the metaphysics I know can compare to this kind of strength, right? The Wongoff, the Wongwu, can the celestial clan members of the strength of the other cans. In the celestial, they were can of the heave. In that case, how powerful would the other blessed and heavenly abodes be? While I was thinking, I suddenly remembered that Wang Can and Lu Jinyang had talked about the blessed lands in Chiyo's tomb. So I asked Wang Can about them. After asking around, we learned that the so-called spirited mountain blessed land was one of the 72 blessed lands of Taoism. Although the blessed lands were hidden in the world and not known to outsiders, some of them were still related to the real world. The blessed lands have been passed down for hundreds of years. After dozens of generations, the family became very large, and it was impossible for all of them to live in the blessed lands. So, except for a few families like the Wangs, which had a small population, the rest of the families would send their members to the secular world. Some of these people would cut off contact with their families after they went to the secular world, but most of them would still be related to their families. In the secular world, they would gradually establish a foundation and become a metaphysical family in the secular world. Although Lu Jinyang's Lu family was a family that had risen in the early days of the founding of the People's Republic, the old man of the Lu family was a disciple sent by the Lu family in the Blessed Lands. On his way to prosperity, he had the support of the Blessed Lands, so he had always kept in touch with his family. That was why when Wang Can asked him about the Lu family in the Blessed Lands, Lu Jinyang told me that it was his family's ancestral court. After listening to his explanation, I understood. Then I remembered several metaphysical families in the Metaphysics Society, including the Han family in Qinling Mountains, the Zhang family in Mount Mang, the Yang family in Qingdu, the Lai family in Luliang, and the Su family in Jinling. Are they also the peripheral forces of the Blessed Lands? I asked Wang Can again, but he didn't know the answer. He only said that the people in the Blessed Lands only cared about the Great Way. Most of them were people who worked hard to cultivate. Although there were conflicts and intrigues between them, they didn't care about the external forces. What's more, these outer sect disciples were all disciples who had been sent out. Those who were sent out were those whose cultivation talents were deemed to be low by the clan. The elites were all left in the clan, so they were not familiar with the outer sect disciples of other clans. However, he knew one of them. It was the Zhang family in the Blessed Lands of Mount Mang. The Wanwu Grotto Heaven was located on Mount Wanwu, which was located in Juyuan, Henan Province, next to Luoyang. The Blessed Lands of Mount Mang were located in the northern suburbs of Luoyang, so they were very close to each other. I had heard that the Zhang family in Mount Mang had an external force in the secular world. Speaking of the Zhang family, I thought of Zhang Kunlun, the fat man from the Metaphysics Association who was known as the Double Pride along with Han Wennan. He was very powerful, but he kept a low profile. He had been in contact with me many times, but Lu Jinyang and Han Wennan had always been in contact with me, but he had never worked with me. He was the one I couldn't see through the most. When Lu Jinyang and Han Wennan entered the sacrificial well for the blood sacrifice in the royal tomb of the Shang dynasty, Zhang Kunlun didn't show up. I didn't know what his cultivation was at the moment, but judging from Han Wennan and Lu Jinyang's situation, he was probably close to the Celestial Master realm. Of course, it wasn't impossible for him to become a Celestial Master before me. I couldn't help but sigh. Before I graduated from college, I didn't know if there were any other cultivators in the world except for Dengmang. When I went south to Shenzhen and joined the Metaphysics Association, it was as if I had opened the door to a new world. I saw many Xianmen forces and families. I felt that the world was so big, and those Xianmen forces and families were the whole world of cultivation. At that time, I couldn't imagine that what I saw was just the tip of the iceberg. There were more terrifying forces hidden in our world, but they were outside the secular world that we couldn't see. And the people around me were inextricably linked to these great forces. It turned out that this was the real world. After chatting for a while, we had dinner together. Then Wang Can said goodbye to me. Although the Wang family was willing to be the Holy Spirit Guard, He couldn't stay with me all the time. As the head of the 10 caves, the Wang family was also a great force. They had a lot of family affairs. After leaving for so many days, they had accumulated a lot of things that Wang Can had to deal with. I was going to the Green Mountains to find the Fox King Palace, so I wouldn't force Wang Can to stay. After a simple farewell, we parted ways. Before leaving, Officer Wang told me the specific location of the Wangwu Fairyland. He also invited me to visit the Wangwu Fairyland in 3 months. At that time, many families in the blessed and heavenly abode would hold the heavenly grand ritual. The Taoist sacrificial ceremony was called the Taoist sacrificial ceremony, and the heavenly grand ritual was the most important one. It was a tradition of the families in the blessed cave for more than 1,000 years. It was held every 10 years, and the big families in the blessed cave took turns to host it. During the heavenly grand ritual, in addition to praying for the alignment of the stars, the protection of the people, and the peace of the country, it also defined the ranking of the blessed cave. The reason why the Wangwu cave was called the head of the 10 caves was that when Wang Can's father was still alive, the Wang family had taken the first place in the heavenly grand ritual. This year's heavenly grand ritual would be held in the Wangwu cave. However, the Wang family wasn't as strong as before. They couldn't compete for the first place, and it was hard to say whether they could keep their position in the 10 caves or not. I couldn't provide any help to Wang Can in this kind of competition. After listening to his sad face, I comforted him. After seeing Wang Can off, the fatty came to me and told me that he had told his father that he would go with me to the Green Mountains. Lin Aching didn't object. I turned around and didn't see Lin Aching. After asking the fatty, I learned that Lin Aching had left. He said that he had gone back to his hometown. His hometown. Lin Aching's hometown was also my hometown. After burying my parents, I hadn't gone back to my hometown. Now that I thought about it, I couldn't help but feel a little sad. I thought about it for a while and decided that I should go back to my hometown to pay my respects to my parents during the Zhongyuan festival. At the same time, I could visit Uncle Lin. Chapter 540. After leaving Jui County, we returned to Jining along the way we had come. Then, we headed in another direction. Not long after, we arrived at Sishui County. Mount Green Dragon was located in Quamlin Town, Sishui County. I thought it was remote and inconvenient to travel there. However, after asking around, I found out that there was a national forest park there. Every day, a shuttle bus went there. Next to the bus station, there were many unlicensed cars. They all used this route. It was much more convenient now. I found a minibus and asked Qilin, Fatty, and Yao Yao to get on it. We headed to Mount Green Dragon. The Qi and Lu provinces were crowded and hospitable. When the driver of the unlicensed car recognized that we weren't locals, he excitedly acted as a tour guide and told us the legend of Mount Green Dragon. The Azure Dragon Mountain that he spoke of was incredible. He said that this mountain was not a mountain, but rather a large mountain formed by an azure dragon. There were many ancient caves on the mountain. It was the temporary imperial residence of the Jade Emperor, the second hometown of Taishan Granny, and the summer resort of Guanyin Bodhisattva. The Queen Mother of the West, Granny Lianhua, the third imperial aunt, the body-giving lady, and Erlang God often visited this place. In ancient times, the ancestor of carpenters had come here. He said that he went to the mountain to cut firewood and cut his finger on a blade of grass. After carefully observing the blade's serrated edge, he invented the saw and became the ancestor of carpenters. There was another more famous legend. During the spring and autumn period, there was a drought in the state of Lu. Confucius brought his disciples to the Sisui River every day to pray for rain. One day, he saw a group of naughty children throwing stones at a small azure snake. He felt sorry for it and saved it. He brought it home and took good care of it. After it recovered, he released it into the Sisui River. Unexpectedly, as soon as the azure snake entered the river, the waves surged. The azure snake turned into a giant dragon, waving its claws to thank Confucius for saving its life. Only then did the old master realize that he had saved an azure dragon. After Azure Dragon returned to the Dragon Palace, he told his father, the old Dragon King, that he had been saved. The Dragon King told him that he shouldn't forget his father's kindness. He asked Azure Dragon to bring the treasures from the Dragon Palace to thank the old master. However, Azure Dragon said that the old master was a virtuous man and wouldn't be greedy for treasures. These days, the headmaster had been praying for rain for the state of Lu. He only hoped that his father would reign for the state of Lu to repay the headmaster's kindness. The old Dragon King was put in a difficult position. He said that he needed the Jade Emperor's imperial edict to make it rain, so he shook his head and refused. However, the Azure Dragon secretly ordered the Dragon Palace's Marine clan to go ashore in the dark to try to make it rain. In the end, they were discovered the moment they went ashore. The Jade Emperor was furious and sent the god of thunder and goddess of lightning to stop them. The heavenly soldiers and generals moved swiftly. The Azure Dragon had just arrived at Quanlin town and had not had time to reign when he encountered the god of thunder and goddess of lightning. Next, the god of thunder and goddess of lightning disregarded all consequences and struck the Azure Dragon to death 10 kilometers north of Quanlin town, turning it into the Azure Dragon Hill of today. After the death of the Green Dragon, he did not forget the drought in the state of Lu and the kindness of Confucius. After turning into the Green Dragon Mountain, he spat out a lot of clear water from the cracks in the rocks, forming a beautiful scene of spring water like a forest. The spring water converged and zigzagged as it flowed from east to west, forming a spectacle of water flowing backward in front of the sage's gate in Siufu. The old master saying, "The dead are like men, unwilling to part with day and night," was inspired by this scene. The taxi driver spoke with a thick Shandong accent. It was hard to understand him, but we still enjoyed listening to him. However, after listening to him talk about myths and legends for a long time, he didn't mention anything about the Fox clan. I tried to ask him, "I've heard people talk about foxy women in this mountain. Can you tell me more about them?" The taxi driver was bewildered. He scratched his head and said, "I'm from Quanlin town, but I've never heard about foxy women." I had no choice but to give up. The Green Mountains country was located on the Green Dragon Hill, but there were no legends about the Fox clan here. It was strange. Time flew as we talked along the way. Soon, we reached the foot of the Green Dragon Hill. There was a national forest park here, which had become a famous tourist attraction. When we got off the taxi, we didn't see the green hills and clear waters that we had imagined. Instead, we saw an endless stream of cars and countless hotels and restaurants. It was convenient this way. I didn't hurry to go up the hill, so I found a hotel to stay in. I took the fatty and the little fox girl to have a meal and rested for the night. The next morning, we bought the tickets and went to the park. After the mountain had been developed, the roads had been built, and there were buses for tourists to ride. Looking at the buses that came every few minutes, I couldn't help but frown. Although the Green Dragon Hill wasn't small, there were so many tourists here every day. How could the Green Mountains fox stay here? If they moved away, it would be a tragedy. But then, I remembered that the fox girl had told me that the Fox King Palace was here. The Green Mountains clan wouldn't abandon it. Moreover, she had just come back 2 years ago. With this thought, I felt a little more at ease. I took the fatty and the little fox girl. We didn't take the buses, but walked to the mountain. We walked along the road. After walking for several kilometers, we reached the depths of the mountain. The noise of the outside world was completely isolated from this place. Although there were still roads that passed through this place, there weren't many traces of development on either side of the road. In fact, there were still many barren and primitive places in the mountain. It was completely different from what I had imagined. Back then, the fox girl had told me that as long as I brought Yao Yao to the Green Dragon Mountain, there would be people from the Green Hill tribe who would come and find us. Thus, I didn't intentionally search for the location of the Fox King Palace. Instead, I walked forward aimlessly. When I reached a place with excellent scenery, I called the fatty and the little fox girl and jumped down from the side of the road. Following the mountain rocks, I walked into the dense forest and casually admired the primitive scenery of the Green Dragon Mountain. On the way here, the legends that the taxi driver had told me were obviously fabricated. However, There were many ancient caves on this mountain. On the way, I saw caves that had been developed and had names carved on them. There were Cowskin Cave, Wolf Cave, Badger Cave, and Coxcomb Cave. There were also many undeveloped caves hidden in the cracks of the mountain walls. Looking at the different shapes and sizes of the caves, I became interested. I climbed and drilled through the caves, having a lot of fun. Just as I was about to enter a cave by the cliff, a voice came from next to me. Guest, the undeveloped areas in the mountain are too dangerous. Tourists aren't allowed to play privately. Please leave this place and go to the scenic spots near the main road to play. I turned around and saw a middle-aged woman wearing a staff uniform standing next to the cliff. She was looking at us. I felt strange. This place was quite far from the man-made main road. Why would a staff member come here? Moreover, I hadn't noticed when she had arrived. I stared at the staff member for a while, but didn't feel anything strange. I smiled at her and climbed up from the side. I smiled and apologized. I'll return to the main road immediately. Then, I prepared to leave. However, the staff member stopped me. This place is too far away from the main road. She's afraid that we won't be able to find the way back. She wants us to follow her and send us back. Then, she didn't ask if we agreed or not and directly walked forward. I smiled and exchanged glances with the fatty. Then, we followed him with interest. It was really difficult to walk in the depths of the mountain. The fatty, the fox girl, and I had high cultivation bases, so we weren't afraid. Although the Kirin didn't have a high cultivation base, it was still easy for it to follow us. The only strange thing was that the staff member leading the way seemed to be familiar with the mountain path. She seemed to have an easier time than us. Not long after, we met another staff member in uniform. This time, it was a middle-aged man. He had a pale face and a chubby body. After meeting the middle-aged woman, they whispered something to each other. They turned around to look at us, but they didn't talk to us. Then, they continued to walk forward. It seemed they were leading the way together. After walking for half a day, they led us to a kernel. On one side was a lush forest, and on the other side was a 10-meter-tall boulder covered in moss. We followed the edge of the boulder and entered the kernel. When we reached the bottom of the col, the man and woman in front of us suddenly stopped. They turned around and gazed at us with dark faces. As the two of them moved, two more people appeared behind the boulder. These two people were not wearing staff uniforms. Instead, they were wearing white robes that looked like ancient Han Chinese clothing. They looked young, but they had long white hair. As soon as they appeared, they circled behind us and surrounded us. They didn't look friendly. Seeing their actions, the corners of my mouth rose. Chapter 541. Although the Green Hill tribe's power was extraordinary, only the elders and chiefs were powerful. The people in front of me obviously didn't have a high status, and their power was limited. Naturally, I didn't feel threatened by them. Moreover, I had the fatty's monster refining gourd. Even if the Green Hill tribe came with all their people, I wouldn't care. I looked at the two newcomers in their traditional Han attire and waited for them to continue. These people looked young, and they were rather impatient. After a while, one of the two white-haired men in ancient attire asked me in a sinister tone, "Who are you? How dare you hold my Green Hill clansman hostage and come to my Green Hill clansman's land? Do you have a death wish?" He sounded fierce, but I didn't care at all. I cupped my hands and said, "You misunderstood me. I didn't kidnap the Green Hill tribe members, and I didn't plan to show off here." Then, I pointed at Yao Yao and continued, "This Miss Lee is from the Green Hill tribe and is also my good friend. She has been living in the mortal world since she was young. She heard that this place is the ancestral court of the Green Hill tribe and wanted to visit her people. She was worried about her safety on the way, so she asked me to help her escort. Now that you have shown up, I didn't disappoint Miss Lee's trust." This was the excuse I had thought of. After I said it, they hesitated. However, the wary and suspicious expressions on their faces did not disappear. The young man who had spoken earlier seemed to want to say something, but was stopped by the middle-aged woman who had brought us here. Then, the middle-aged woman who was wearing the staff uniform of the scenic spot looked at me with a kind expression. She said, "Oh, you're friends who escorted my Green Hill tribe back. Since you are friends, my Green Hill tribe will naturally not blame you for trespassing on my tribe's land. Friends are guests. If you don't mind, why don't you come to my Green Hill tribe and have a few cups of wine to thank you for protecting my people? Although she was inviting us, they were standing around us. It was obvious that they weren't just inviting us for a drink. My original plan was to let Yao Yao go back alone, find a 7-star mugwort, and give it to me. However, that was then, and this was now. Now that I had absolute power in my hands, there was no need for me to worry too much. It would be best if I could make a trip to the Fox King Palace by myself. Thus, I was not against their actions. Instead, I was rather happy. I pretended not to understand their threat and nodded my head. Since Big Sister has sincerely invited me, it would be impolite of me to decline. They probably didn't expect me to agree so readily. After a moment of shock, the middle-aged woman nodded and pointed behind her, making an inviting gesture. "Please follow me." After she said that, she took the lead. The other 3 people gathered behind us, cutting off our path of retreat. They stared at us like tigers watching their prey. I smiled faintly and didn't think much of it. I called Fatty and Yao Yao over and followed them. However, just to be safe, I asked the Fatty to put the Qilin back into the monster refining pot. Although the Qilin was an ancient beast, in essence, it belonged to the monster race. Just like Yao Yao, it could survive in the monster refining pot and obtain benefits. In front of us was a valley surrounded by mountains on 3 sides. After walking for a dozen meters, we reached the end of the path. A stone wall stood in front of us. There was no path in front of us, but the middle-aged woman who was leading the way didn't stop. Instead, she walked directly to the bottom of the mountain wall. She reached out her hand and touched the mountain wall a few times. Then, she turned her head and said to me, "Follow me." Afterwards, she directly bumped into the mountain wall. Her body didn't bounce back. Instead, she hid inside. Since the Qing Qiu tribe lived in this scenic area that looked like a bustling city, they must have some kind of concealment technique. I wasn't surprised and followed her in. The mountain wall looked like it was made of rocks, but after I hit it, it was as if I had hit a soft and elastic membrane. I pushed my feet and went through it. My vision darkened at first, but then it became bright again. When I looked up, the mountain wall was gone. At this moment, I was still in a valley full of birds and flowers. From its position, it was obvious that it was the same valley as the one outside. It was just that the Qing Qiu tribe had used a technique to hide it. This valley was obviously the habitat of the Qing Qiu tribe. It was different from the wilderness outside. The flowers and trees here had obviously been carefully trimmed and cultivated. They didn't grow in a messy way, but retained the beauty of nature. They looked orderly and harmonious. On the slopes on both sides of the valley, there were many pavilions and houses. These houses didn't look like human buildings. They weren't orderly or well-proportioned. They were scattered messily on the hillside and connected to each other without any order. However, the pavilions and houses were like mushrooms growing in the meadow in the shade of the flowers and grass. They complemented each other and created a beautiful scene. I scanned my surroundings and was impressed by the beautiful scenery. My only regret was that the surrounding buildings were all very small. No matter which one it was, it couldn't be related to the Fox King Palace that the Fox Girl had told me about. While I was looking around, the Fatty and Yao Yao were also looking around curiously. The Fatty was an idiot. He obviously didn't look at the beautiful scenery around him. His eyes were fixed on the beautiful Qing Qiu women in the valley. The little fox girl had a strange expression on her face. She looked at the beautifully cut trees and then at the uniquely designed houses. The corners of her mouth curled up into a smile. It was obvious that the similar beauty brought by her bloodline had made her fall in love with this place. The 4 members of the Qing Qiu tribe who had brought us in didn't feel anything about the scenery around them. After we entered, they urged us to continue walking. We walked along the mountain path until we reached a spacious 3-story house at the bottom of the left hillside. The middle-aged woman who had been leading the way stopped and turned to me with a smile. "This is where our elder Yushan handles the tribe's affairs. Please wait here for a moment. I will bring her in to see the elder." After she reports this matter, she will come back to receive you. Finding a member of the tribe who had been lost outside was no small matter for the Qingxiu tribe. As for how to deal with the two outsiders, the fatty and I, these people probably couldn't decide. No matter what, they had to consult the elder first. I understood and nodded with a smile. When Yao Yao heard my words, she took 2 steps back and said in a panicked voice, I don't want to go. I want to stay with you. The fox girl was naturally timid. It was inevitable that she would be scared after suddenly coming here and having to separate from me. I patted her shoulder and comforted her. Don't be afraid. These are all your clansmen. You've returned home. What's there to be afraid of? Follow this big sister in. I'll wait for you outside. The middle-aged woman turned and smiled. He's right. We've returned home. We, the Qingxiu tribe, won't harm our own people. Don't be afraid. After some persuasion, Yao Yao finally put down her fear. Step by step, she turned her head and followed the middle-aged woman inside. The fatty and I waited outside, while the other 3 Green Hill clansmen guarded by our sides, not moving an inch away from us. The fatty turned his head and said to me in a low voice, This Qingxiu tribe is really unreasonable. We've sent their people back. Not only are they not grateful, but they also look at us coldly. It's as if we owe them money. I shook my head and smiled. They are often captured by humans. They have a grudge against humans. It's normal for them to be cold to us. Don't worry about it. We chatted as we waited. Not long after, the middle-aged woman who had gone in earlier came out and smiled at us. Sorry to keep you waiting. I've asked someone to prepare a simple meal and some wine. Please come with me and have a drink. I craned my neck to look behind her. Yao Yao didn't appear with her. Seeing my action, the middle-aged woman explained, Yao Yao is chatting happily with the elder. Elder Yushan is worried that you'll be waiting outside for too long, so he specially arranged for me to come out and entertain the 2 of you. When Yao Yao is done, she'll naturally come find us. You don't have to worry. I frowned. When Yao Yao had gone in, she had told me to wait here. Now that Yao Yao hadn't come out, she wanted to take me away. It was obviously inappropriate. The middle-aged woman would definitely notice that. It was obvious that something was wrong. The fatty wanted to say something, but I extended my hand to stop him. I turned and nodded at the middle-aged woman. I'll do as you say. If that's the case, I'll have to trouble Big Sister to lead the way. Yao Yao definitely wouldn't be harmed here. I wasn't afraid of the Qingxiu people either. Rather than feigning civility with them, it would be better to let them arrange things and see what they were planning. The fatty had always been obedient to me. After I stopped him, he didn't say anything and followed the middle-aged woman into the valley. The other 3 people who had been guarding by our side also followed. Just like before, they blocked our way without saying a word. She said that she was taking us to eat, but the middle-aged woman led the way through many twists and turns. In a short while, she brought us to an extremely desolate forest. Before we could ask anything, the woman suddenly stopped and turned to look at the fatty and me. The smile that had been hanging on her face earlier had disappeared, replaced by a cold expression. She said coldly, My Qingxiu people have been persecuted by you humans for thousands of years. We were forced to hide in the deep mountains and struggle to survive. We didn't communicate with the outside world. Who knew that you would find your way here? If that's the case, don't blame us for being ruthless. She had suddenly turned hostile, but I was prepared for it, so I wasn't surprised. I shook my head faintly. We only sent Yao Yao back. We don't have any intention of persecuting her. As for the grudge between your Qingxiu people and the humans, if you want to take revenge, go find the person who persecuted you. Why do you have to take it out on the 2 of us? The middle-aged woman smirked coldly. I don't know what you're planning, but you know where our Qingxiu people are. After you leave, once you leak the news, you will definitely bring trouble to our Qingxiu people. No matter what, I won't let you leave alive. Attack! Chapter 542. Just as they made their move, the fatty, who was standing beside me, immediately reached into his robes, preparing to take out the monster refining gore to deal with the 3 Green Hill foxes. Before coming, I had already discussed with the fatty that if we were to fight against the Fox clan and the Green Hill clan, we would need to borrow the power of the monster refining gourd. However, the three Fox Clan's powers were obviously average, so using the monster refining gourd would be overkill. I extended my hand to press down on the fatty's arm and shook my head at him, indicating that I would be fine by myself. The fatty gave me a cautious look before pushing me to the side. Just as he retreated, the middle-aged woman who had spoken earlier was the first to rush in front of me. She waved her hands, and several sharp lights shot towards me. The speed of the sharp lights was extremely fast. In a flash, they were already in front of me. It was obvious that the woman had no intention of holding back. She wanted to take my life the moment she made her move. I smirked and waved my sleeve. A surge of true essence swept out. In an instant, the sharp lights were annihilated by my true essence. Immediately after, the remaining true essence charged towards the middle-aged woman at a speed that wasn't inferior to the previous sharp lights. I didn't wait to see how the woman was going to deal with it. I stepped on the astral footwork and sent a streak of astral energy behind me. Just as I made my move against the woman, the three men behind me had already pounced over. However, their target wasn't me, but the fatty, who had already retreated to the side. Even though the fatty was a cultivator, he was from the sect of experience and wasn't good at fighting. The only way he could fight was to set up formations, which was extremely time-consuming. At this moment, he was in a hurry to deal with it. It was obvious that he wasn't a match for the people behind me. After stepping on the astral footwork, I turned my head and saw that the three men had been simultaneously struck by my astral energy. Before they could execute their monster techniques, their bodies were sent flying. The monster race's cultivation was different from that of humans. Even if I had the astral footwork, I couldn't see through their cultivation. However, after that attack, I'd already figured it out. The three people behind me were only at the middle stage of the glorious soul realm. With the three of them working together, they couldn't even withstand my astral footwork. At the heavenly master realm, with the support of the true essence in my body, the power of my Tao is much stronger than before. This upstanding chi was enough to injure the three of them. So, I didn't even look at them. I turned around and stared at the middle-aged woman. This middle-aged woman's cultivation was clearly much higher than the three people behind her. Just now, when I waved out my true essence, it only forced her back a few steps, but didn't injure her. After all, this is the gathering place of the Green Hill clan, and unless it's absolutely necessary, I don't want to form a reconcilable enmity with them. So, I merely wanted to display my strength. At this moment, the middle-aged woman must have seen through my cultivation and didn't dare to rashly attack me. Unexpectedly, the woman didn't play her cards according to common sense. She stood there and gloomily stared at me for a moment. Then, she opened her mouth and let out a shrill cry. Immediately after, she leaped several meters into the air. Her clothes fluttered, and when she landed, she had turned into a snow-white silver fox. Back when I had fought against Yao Yao's mother, I had seen the Green Hill tribe reveal their true form. I wasn't surprised to see them again, but after observing for a moment, I suddenly discovered that this silver fox before me had a total of 3 tails. I couldn't help but furrow my eyebrows. In history, there was a legend of the 9-tailed fox. The historical records said that the Green Hill Fox tribe had 9 tails, and that they were 9-tailed foxes. So, when I had seen Yao Yao's mother's true form, I had paid special attention to her. When I saw that she only had 1 tail, I thought that the historical records were just exaggerations. Who knew that the fox monster in front of me, who was also a Green Hill fox monster, had 3 tails? Could it be that the number of tails grew with the increase in cultivation? Instantly, I made a guess. But if that was really the case, Yao Yao's mother had the cultivation of a heavenly master, but she only had 1 tail. The woman before me had 3 tails. Didn't that mean that her cultivation was far higher than Yao Yao's mother's? Could it be that she had the cultivation of a young god celestial master? I couldn't help but be cautious and didn't dare to let my guard down. I stared at the fox monster's slightly red eyes and circulated the true yuan in my body, preparing to deal with her with all my strength. This fox monster was obviously a fierce character. After a short moment, she stomped on the ground with her hind legs and her body leaped into midair. However, this time, she didn't directly pounce on me. Instead, her body suddenly spun in midair. Following her movements, a violent wind suddenly blew in the surroundings. Countless silver threads appeared out of nowhere and wrapped around me in the violent wind. The silver threads moved very fast under the influence of the strong wind. They were like countless silver needles, releasing a cold aura. Before they reached me, I felt as if I was in the middle of winter, where every drop of water had turned to ice. I didn't dare to be careless, and simultaneously release the Tao and witchcraft essence in my body. Half of it wrapped around me as a defense, while the other half dispersed in the surroundings to welcome the silver needles. I didn't hope to expel them, but only hoped to slow them down and reduce their power. The result this time surprised me. After I released half of the true yuan in my body, it seemed as though there wasn't any resistance. It directly blocked the seemingly endless number of silver needles in the surroundings. Not only that, the silver needles didn't seem to have much power. They were directly swept away by my true yuan and scattered far away. I frowned. Why were the silver needles so weak? Could it be that the middle-aged fox monster didn't use her full power? However, not to mention a young god celestial master. Even in normal celestial masters, spells shouldn't be this weak. What was going on? Before I could figure out, the fox monster screeched again. She opened her scarlet mouth and spurted a pink mist, which then turned into a pink thread and dashed toward me. When I had fought with Yao Yao's mother, I had seen her spit out pink mist. Even though I had used the yin-yang fish formed by the witchcraft chi to eliminate it, I felt that the pink mist wasn't ordinary. Later on, I heard from her that this was the Green Hill Fox tribe's innate divine power. Even though I had some doubts, I didn't dare to be careless. I quickly opened my mouth and chanted, "Condense." At that moment, the pink thread had already arrived in front of me. It didn't directly attack me, but suddenly turned into a thick pink mist, attempting to envelop me. As he recited the one-word incantation, the power of the Taoist technique immediately appeared, and the pink threads that were dispersing instantly stopped. Using this opportunity, I used the astral steps and circulated all of the true yuan in my body. Under the amplification of the astral steps, the power of the Tao and witchcraft chi doubled. The two powers intertwined in front of me and rotated in a clockwise direction. After a short while, they formed a yin-yang fish. Previously, I had used the yin-yang fish to deal with the pink mist. To be safe, I naturally had to use this move. After the yin-yang fish appeared, the power of the astral steps disappeared. The pink thread started moving again. As it approached me, it continued to disperse in all directions. However, at that moment, the yin-yang fish formed by the Tao and witchcraft chi was in front of me. As it rotated, the yin-yang fish emitted a strong suction force. It was like a whale swallowing water. It directly absorbed all of the pink mist. During the absorption process, the yin-yang fish didn't stop rotating. When the pink mist entered the yin-yang fish, it instantly disappeared. After a few seconds, the pink thread completely disappeared as though it had never appeared. Only the yin-yang fish remained in front of me. When I raised my eyes to look at the fox spirit, she had already fallen from midair. Her body was half-crouched on the ground. 2 streaks of dark red blood seeped out from the sides of her mouth. It was a ghastly sight. At that moment, I understood that even though the fox spirit had 3 tails, her actual cultivation was inferior to Yao Yao's mother's. She was only at the complete glory of knowledge. They were both from the Green Hill Fox clan, and their cultivation was similar. Why was the number of tails different? This was too strange. I wanted to understand this question, but it wasn't a suitable time to ask. I temporarily kept my doubts in my heart. Looking at the fox spirit, I was about to speak when I suddenly heard a reprimand from behind me. Who dares to behave atrociously in my Green Hill clan? Chapter 543. The Green Hill Foxes were different from humans, as they cultivated Yao Qi. My power of insight was unable to determine their cultivation, but I could still faintly sense a sharp aura from the woman who was flying over from afar. Disregarding everything else, just her ability to fly in the air proved that the woman had at least the cultivation of a heavenly master. I was rather annoyed. The Green Hill Foxes were truly too unreasonable. Previously, the middle-aged woman had wanted to take my life at every turn, and now, the woman with the cultivation of a heavenly master had just arrived. Without distinguishing between right and wrong, she had labeled me as a person who had behaved atrociously. Since that was the case, I might as well behave atrociously for once. I smiled coldly and no longer held back. I took a step in the direction of the woman. This was the final step of the 9-star Heavenly Dipper. The power of concealment was contained, and the true essence in my body circulated rapidly. Perhaps it was because she had seen my actions, or perhaps it was because the woman had already prepared to attack me. But when she arrived in front of me, she raised her hand without saying a word, and a strange blood-red snake bared its fangs as it charged towards me. The strange snake wasn't corporeal, but was formed from a layer of blood-red mist. The red mist carried a sinister, corrosive power, and its power was evidently rather impressive. I didn't mind it at all. At that moment, the true essence in my body had already been adjusted to its optimal state. My right hand grabbed the air in front of me, and an enormous illusory handprint appeared out of thin air. When the strange snake was still a few meters away from me, I immediately grabbed it with my illusory handprint and crushed it. This was a divine ability that I had only grasped after reaching the Heavenly Master realm. In essence, the handprint was an illusion of the true essence in my body leaking out. True essence was different from Dao Qi and Shaman Qi. Once Dao Qi and Shaman Qi left the body, they couldn't be controlled, but once true essence left the body, they could still be controlled and used at will. When she saw her divine ability being destroyed by a single strike of mine, the baleful aura in the woman's beautiful eyes grew even heavier, and she shouted in a delicate voice before she said coldly, "If you had allowed yourself to be captured, then perhaps I would have spared your life. But since you insist on resisting stubbornly, then don't blame me." With that, her body spun, and after a white mist rose, her figure disappeared into thin air. I was already used to the Green Hill clan's sophistry, so I didn't take her words to heart. I activated the true essence in my body while carefully searching for traces of this woman. A few seconds later, I felt a strong gust of wind behind me. I spun around, but before I could react, my body sank. I lifted my head to take a look. I didn't know when, but I was surrounded by a white mist. The mist didn't look thick, but it was actually very sticky. It wrapped around my body and almost restricted my movements. I tried to move the true essence in my body, but I discovered that after my true essence left my body for a few centimeters, I couldn't move any further. He didn't know what kind of divine ability this white mist was, but it could even suppress true essence. After confirming that my true essence was useless, I didn't make any more pointless attempts. I stopped what I was doing and lifted my head to look. The silver-haired woman still hadn't appeared, but there was a fox with silver fur in front of me. The fox was huge and looked like a snow wolf. There seemed to be flames burning in its eyes, and it was glaring at me maliciously. When it saw me looking at it, its mouth moved slightly and it spoke in human language. "You trespassed on my Green Hill clan's land and harmed my people. You're asking for death." It was as if she was pronouncing a sentence. Her gaze was dignified, but her words were vicious. I didn't care, and I didn't even pay attention to what she said. My gaze was fixed on the silver foxes, but, unlike the fox demon that the middle-aged woman had transformed into, this silver fox had 4 tails. Based on the power that she had displayed, the 4 tails were probably at the level of a normal seal heavenly master. My current cultivation base was also at the seal heavenly master realm, but because my seal wasn't ordinary and the true essence in my body had been transformed from witchcraft and Taoist Qi, my power was considered outstanding among the seal heavenly masters. The fact that this woman could temporarily subdue me showed that the Green Hill clan was extraordinary. While I was thinking, the woman moved again. Her mouth moved slightly, and she began to chant a difficult incantation. Although I didn't know how powerful the fox's incantation was, I instinctively felt threatened. I didn't dare to be careless and directly activated the true essence of the witchcraft and Taoist qi in my body. I raised my right hand and used my index finger as a brush. Although the Celestial Master Seal is not like the Yang Spirit Seal, which gathers the aura of heaven and earth, it also contains the strongest power. Although I did not use the seal, this slanted stroke is half of the word person in the 4 characters of the seal. After the stroke, the Jinqi, which was originally difficult to move in the white fog, seems to have turned into a sharp blade, cutting a crack in the white fog. Immediately after, I turned the tip of my finger and pressed it to the right. This time, another crack was torn in the white mist, and the 2 strokes merged together, forming a complete human character. The white mist, which I didn't know what kind of supernatural power it was, could no longer resist. It collapsed in an instant, and the binding power disappeared. Seeing that I had escaped, the huge silver fox's face showed a human-like expression of panic. However, she didn't stop chanting the incantation. Instead, she sped up. At that moment, I felt an increasingly dangerous aura. Just as I was about to take action and interrupt the silver fox's incantation, the silver fox's mouth stopped after I took 2 steps forward. The panic on her face disappeared, and she regained her previous coldness. It was obvious that the incantation had been completed. After a while, another wave of white mist rose behind the silver fox. The difference was that this time, the amount of white mist that rose was much greater, almost covering the entire sky behind her. Furthermore, the white mist didn't attack me. Instead, it kept circling behind her. Not long after, something vaguely appeared in the white mist. I focused my eyes and saw that the thing that appeared in the white mist was an incomparably huge, illusory fox. Although this fox's body was also silver, its fur was different from the silver fox that the silver-haired woman had transformed into. This fox's fur was closer to white, and its eyebrows and beard were like withered grass. It was very long and messy. It sat cross-legged on the ground, and its pair of dim yellow eyes, which were very small compared to its body, emitted an incomparably evil aura. Although the fox's image was illusory, its malicious gaze seemed real. When I looked at it, it also stared at me. At that moment, I felt as if a sinister snake had drilled into my brain, and I felt as if I had fallen into an ice cave. At that moment, a warm current suddenly surged out from my chest. After it circled around my body, the previous cold and malicious feeling instantly disappeared. I also had the strength to pull my gaze away from the fox image. After that, I didn't dare to look at it any longer. I clenched my teeth and sat cross-legged, activating the true essence in my body. At the Biwi area above my head, a light suddenly appeared and the seal floated. The Celestial Master Seal was currently my strongest technique. After activating it, I didn't hesitate any longer and infused all of the true essence in my body into it. In that instant, the seal shone brightly, and on the left half of the milky white seal, a heaven word appeared out of thin air. It charged towards the silver fox and the fox image behind her. As it charged, the heaven word expanded with the wind, becoming larger and larger. When it reached the giant fox image, it had already shrouded the entire sky and earth and directly suppressed the giant fox image. The heaven word originally had the power to frighten and expel evil. After suppressing it, the white mist melted like frost, instantly turning into nothingness. Only the giant fox image suddenly moved. It first raised its head to look at the heaven word that was suppressing it, and then looked at me from afar. Its figure dimmed and disappeared under the heaven word. At the same time that the giant fox image disappeared, the silver fox, who was lying on the ground, suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. Her entire body collapsed, and only her head was still raised high. She glared at me. In her eyes, there was a trace of fear, but more than that, there was a malicious hatred. With absolute power, I didn't take her hateful gaze to heart. I closed my eyes and put the seal away. After adjusting the true essence in my body, I stood up and looked around. After confirming that there were no other elders of the Green Hill clan rushing over, I lifted my foot and walked towards the silver fox. When I arrived in front of her before I could speak, the silver fox spat out a mouthful of blood and said coldly to me, "Don't be too arrogant. This is the territory of the Green Hill clan. In a moment, the clan leader and the high priest will receive the news and rush over. When that time comes, you can't avoid death." The clan leader and the high priest? I'd heard from Yao Yao's mother that the two of them had at least the cultivation of a young god celestial master. They were indeed not people that I could deal with at the moment. However, with the fatty's devil refining gourd, I wasn't afraid of anyone. Naturally, I wouldn't take it to heart. I shook my head. You attacked me indiscriminately, and I could think that you were young and ignorant. However, your clan leader and the high priest also attacked me. Isn't that a little too unreasonable? The silver fox smiled, revealing sharp teeth that were stained with blood. She replied, "If I let you leave, it will only expose the location of the Green Hill clan. If I don't kill you, the Green Hill clan will face the danger of extinction. If you were in my shoes, what would you do?" What she said sounded right, but in reality, it didn't make sense at all. I shook my head again. If you didn't want to expose the clan's territory, you could have just not brought us in. However, I remember that it was the Green Hill clan that brought me in on their own accord. The silver fox didn't think so. She said, "We discovered that you were spying on the Green Hill clan. If we don't bring you back for interrogation, how can we be at ease?" Her words were a little unreasonable. I didn't want to argue with her, so I changed the topic. I pointed at the tail behind her and pointed at the middle-aged woman that I had injured severely. I asked, "I saw that you have 4 tails and she has 3. I believe that the cultivation of the Green Hill clan is related to the number of tails you have. However, why does Yao Yao only have 1 tail even though her cultivation is the same as that woman's?" When the silver fox heard my question, she was stunned for a moment. Then she grinned. "Since you're going to die soon, there's no harm in telling you. Yao Yao's bloodline is the sacred bloodline of the Green Hill clan. She was born different from others. No matter what her cultivation is, she will always have 1 tail." Chapter 544. Just as I was about to ask more questions, there was a commotion behind me. I turned to see a group of 4 people flying in the air. They were furiously flying towards me. Before they reached me, I heard a furious roar. "How dare you hurt Yushan? I'll tear you into pieces." Following the roar, the 4 of them instantly flew in front of me like 4 rays of light. I finally saw clearly that there were 1 man and 3 women. The man was dressed in black, and the women were dressed in white. They all had good looks. The man in black was the one who had roared earlier. After stopping in front of me, the 4 of them didn't hesitate at all. They instantly spread out and surrounded me. I frowned. Based on their aura, none of them were weaker than the silver-haired woman, especially the man in black. His aura was the strongest, and his cultivation was obviously much higher. I was confident that I could deal with one of them and 2 of them. However, I had no chance of winning against all 4 of them at the same time. Just as I was thinking, the 4 of them didn't give me time to react. The man in black said, "Die." Then he called for the others to attack me together. I didn't dare to be careless. Just as I was about to call for the fatty to use the devil refining gourd to subdue them, a cold shout came from the side. "Stop!" The voice wasn't loud, but it carried an indescribable sense of authority. When the 4 people who were attacking me heard the voice, they stopped casting their spells. Then, they withdrew their spells and turned to look behind them. I also stopped calling for the fatty and lifted my head to look behind them. Behind the 4 of them was a skinny man in a black robe. He was obviously rushing over. His pale face was flushed unhealthily. He was panting as he spoke to the 4 people. "The high priest has ordered that no one is allowed to hurt our Green Hill tribe's esteemed guest." The man in black who had roared earlier was obviously indignant. Once he finished speaking, he hurriedly said, "Senior Tsang Lang, are you mistaken? He just injured you, Sean. How can he be our Green Hill tribe's esteemed guest?" The thin man shook his head and said, "This is the high priest's order. He wants me to bring our esteemed guest to the Fox King Palace to meet the clan leader and the high priest." When I mentioned the high priest again, even though the black-clothed man was still very indignant, he was obviously afraid. His mouth moved, but he didn't say anything. He just turned his head and glared at me. Then, he turned around angrily and rushed to where the silver fox was lying on the ground. He bent down and checked on the silver fox's injuries. After he left, the skinny man walked in front of me with a friendly smile. After bowing, he said warmly, "My father and the chief have invited you to meet at the Fox King Palace." When he mentioned the 3 words Fox King Palace, I pricked up my ears. Now that he confirmed it, I couldn't help but feel delighted. Although I don't know why the Qingqiu clan leader and the high priest suddenly invited me to the Fox Palace, according to Yao Yao's mother, the 7-star mugwort is in the Fox Palace. My motive for coming here is for the 7-star mugwort, so no matter what, I have to make a trip to the Fox King Palace. After returning the greeting, I opened my mouth to accept the invitation. I turned around and called for the fatty, letting the skinny man lead the way as we walked forward together. Very quickly, we walked out of the remote forest. We didn't head in the direction of Elder Yushan, but in the opposite direction. Not long later, we went around a call and came to another valley. There is a clear difference between this valley and the previous one. Although they were both green, the most eye-catching thing in this valley were the towering trees. I couldn't recognize the species of the trees, but every one of them was at least 50 meters tall. The tree trunks weren't straight, but rather curved. Even though they were tall, they didn't give off an overbearing aura. Instead, they looked cute. There were many buildings here. Similarly, they were different from the small wooden houses that looked like mushrooms that dotted the meadow. The buildings here were all leaning against the trees, looking narrow and tall. At first glance, they looked like tube-shaped buildings, but they blended in with the trees, giving off a strange sense of beauty. We continued to walk forward. After walking past the treehouse building, the view before us suddenly brightened up. There was an empty space in front of us, and behind the empty space was a huge circular building. The overall style of the building was similar to the treehouse behind us, but the shape was completely different. It looked more like a huge circular stadium. Countless tall trees formed a circle on the outermost part of the building. The circular building hung on all the trees. The most mystical thing was that the branches of the trees blended in with the building, forming all the doors, windows, and eaves. Even the leaves on the trees became decorations around the building. The entire building blended in with the trees. Just as I lifted my head to admire the view, I saw the skinny man leading the way stop in his tracks. He pointed at the building in front of us and introduced it to me. "This is the Fox King Palace. My father and the tribe leader have already set up a banquet inside. Esteemed guest, please go ahead first." Even though he was from the Fox tribe, he was very courteous. I nodded and didn't reject his good intentions. I led the fatty to the entrance of the huge treehouse. As the entire building was suspended in the air, there was a long flight of stairs at the entrance of the palace. These stairs were weaved from the branches of the surrounding trees. Not only were they long, but they were also wide. At this moment, there were several young ladies with different hair colors standing on both sides of the stairs. They had beautiful features and pure eyes. When I walked over, they bowed in unison and said, "Esteemed guest, you don't have to be so courteous. You could just walk straight in." I subconsciously cupped my hands to return the greeting. The few nervous young ladies from Qingqiu burst into laughter. Before I could react, the skinny man followed behind me and said awkwardly, "Esteemed guest, you don't have to be so courteous. You could just walk straight in." Only then did I realize that I had made a fool of myself. As an esteemed guest, I didn't have to bow to these young ladies. These etiquettes were ancient etiquettes that had been lost for a long time. I only knew a little about them after entering the celestial gate to cultivate. However, I didn't know much about the specific details. I smiled awkwardly and hurriedly walked up the stairs. Very quickly, I reached the entrance of the palace. At this moment, the palace doors were already wide open. There was a large hall inside. The architectural style of the hall was almost the same as the outside. It was also filled with vibrant greenery, and there were leaves on the walls. In the middle of the hall, there were 2 rows of short tables made of logs. They weren't arranged in the usual left and right rows, but in the front and back rows. At this moment, a man and a woman were kneeling behind the 2 short tables in the middle of the hall. The woman also had silver hair and was dressed in white. She looked even more beautiful than Elder Yushan, who I had just injured. However, she looked more mature overall. Her expression was solemn and had a trace of dignity. The other man was rather old. He wore a black robe that was dotted with silver stars. His hair was a mix of black and white. His figure was slightly hunched, and his eyebrows and beard drooped a few inches. He sat cross-legged on the ground with a wooden crutch in his hand. He looked rather strange. Seeing that I had entered, the old man didn't move while the silver-haired woman stood up. She greeted me with a clear voice. "Esteemed guest, please forgive me for not welcoming you earlier." I naturally wouldn't take her polite words to heart. From their appearance, I could roughly guess their identity. Thus, I cupped my hands in greeting. "Chief, you being too serious." Junior Zhou greets Chief Qingxiu and High Priest. After a round of pleasantries, the woman invited me to sit cross-legged at the short table opposite them. Then, she started talking about Yao Yao. She first thanked me for sending Yao Yao back to Qingxiu. Then, she apologized to me, saying that it wasn't her idea that Yushan and the rest wanted to kill me. It was because Qingxiu tribe viewed humans as enemies that Yushan and the rest acted on their own and repaid kindness with enmity. I had always been a person who was amenable to coaxing, but not coercion. After hearing what she said, I couldn't pursue the matter further. I nodded and smiled, indicating that it was all a misunderstanding. The female chief was an open-minded person. After hearing what I said, she raised the wooden cup in front of her and toasted me with a cup of fruit wine. Then, she didn't mention the matter again. Instead, she asked me, "Our Qingxiu tribe has always been clear about what we love and what we hate. Mr. Zhou has sent our people back. Our Qingxiu tribe is greatly indebted to you. We should repay you. However, our Qingxiu tribe hasn't communicated with the outside world for many years. We really don't know how to repay you. If Mr. Zhou has any requests, please tell us. Our Qingxiu tribe will definitely fulfill them." After listening to her words, I was stunned. Chapter 545. After some consideration, I quickly came to a decision. With the fatty's monster refining gourd, they could give it to me if they wanted to. Even if they didn't want to, I had my ways. Why should I hide and act like a villain? Thinking about that, I smiled and said, "Chief's words are too serious. I was entrusted by someone to send Yao Yao back, so it can't be considered a favor. However, since Chief has mentioned this matter, I do have something that I would like to ask Chief's help with." Perhaps it was my straightforward attitude that surprised Chief Qingxiu. "Mister, why don't you tell me about it? I've heard that there's a mystical herb that only grows in Qingxiu's Fox Palace. Does Chief know about it?" I asked directly. "Seven-star mugwort?" Chief Qingxiu raised his eyebrows and asked. The black-robed high priest, who had been sitting silently by the side, opened his eyes and glanced at me. Seven-star mugwort was a precious item. It was reasonable for them to have such a reaction. I nodded and continued. "I've heard that this mystical herb is a treasure of Qingxiu. I shouldn't covet it, but I have an old friend who is suffering from an incurable disease. He needs the entire seven-star mugwort in order to find a chance of survival. I have no choice but to ask for it. Chief, please don't blame me." Chief Qingxiu frowned. After I finished, he kept silent for a while before replying. "Mr. Zhou is right. Our Qingxiu does have such an item. However, this seven-star mugwort is a sacred item of our tribe. It has never been given to outsiders for thousands of years." At this point, he muttered to himself, as though he couldn't make up his mind. I didn't urge him. It wasn't a gentleman's behavior to ask for something precious for no reason. If Qingxiu could give me the seven-star mugwort willingly, it would be the best. If he wasn't willing to give it to me, it would be understandable. I would think of another way. It was up to me to steal or rob it. There was no need to force him. Just as I was waiting, an old voice suddenly spoke. 7-star mugwort isn't a sacred item. If this young mister needs it, he can take it. I turned around. I didn't know when a high priest had stood up, but he was leaning on his walking stick. His dim yellow eyes weren't looking at me. Instead, he was gazing at a clay god statue that was enshrined deep inside the hall. However, with my cultivation level, it wasn't difficult for me to see it clearly. When I looked closely, I discovered that the statue wasn't a fox like I had imagined. Instead, it was in the shape of a person. However, this person was quite strange. His body was split in the middle. The left side looked as gentle as jade, while the right side was clearly much thicker and covered in dense black hair. After seeing it clearly, my heart couldn't help but skip a beat. Wasn't this the image I saw when I entered the illusion in the Yinshang Royal Mausoleum? Why would he appear here? I rubbed my eyes in disbelief. I wanted to take a closer look. However, I could only see a rough outline of the god statue. I couldn't see if the body on the left side was similar to me. Hence, I couldn't determine if this god statue was the same as the one in the Yinshang Royal Mausoleum. Chief Qingqiu's words interrupted my thoughts. She seemed to have some objections to the high priest's decision. She whispered to the black-robed priest, "The 7-star mugwort is a sacrificial item in the ancestral scripture. How can it not be considered a holy item if it were given to him?" The high priest shook his head without waiting for her to finish her sentence. It was obvious that the high priest had high prestige. He merely shook his head, and the silver-haired Chief Qingqiu immediately stopped talking. She didn't dare to argue any further. After she quieted down, the high priest spoke again. "This young mister has sent back our saintess. During the sacrificial ceremony, compared to the saintess, the mugwort is nothing." Then he coughed and asked the Chief Qingqiu to bring me a whole stalk of 7-star mugwort. Even though it was obvious that the silver-haired Chief Qingqiu was unwilling, she didn't dare to go against the high priest's words. She left with a displeased expression. Hearing the high priest mention the word saintess, I had a question in my heart. I couldn't suppress it anymore. After the Chief Qingqiu left, I asked the high priest, "Previously, I heard someone mention that Yao Yao has the holy bloodline of the Qingqiu clan. Just now, you said that she is the saintess. Forgive me for my presumptuousness, but what does the holy bloodline and saintess mean?" The high priest smiled. He then retracted his gaze from the depths of the hall. He walked too shakily with the help of his walking stick, as though he was stretching his body. As he walked, he replied, "The holy bloodline is the holy bloodline. Yao Yao has the holy bloodline, so naturally, she is the saintess. Since you know of the Qingqiu foxes, you must have heard of the Tushan foxes, right?" Tushan foxes? Naturally, I knew of this. It was said that during the era of the 3 sovereigns, Yu the Great, who had stabilized the world with his miraculous flood control, had a wife and a daughter, Jiao. She was the daughter of the Tushan foxes. When Yu the Great left to control the flood, he missed her so much that he wrote the first love poem in the history of China. There were only 4 words in the poem, "waiting for someone." But what was the relationship between the Tushan foxes and the Qingqiu clan? I nodded and didn't say anything. The high priest didn't turn around to look at me. He continued to walk as he continued. The Tushan foxes aren't a clan. In reality, they are just a branch of the Qingqiu clan. Because of their noble status, they are known as the holy bloodline in our clan. For thousands of years, our clan's holy bloodline has never flourished. In recent years, we have lost our bloodline. So, you bringing the saintess back to our Qingqiu clan is indeed a great favor. There was such a thing? I frowned. I wasn't suspecting that the high priest was lying to me. But if it was true, why didn't Yao Yao's mother tell me about this? After thinking for a while, I thought of a possibility. According to Yao Yao's mother, she had run away from here when she was young. She was young and ignorant, so she didn't know about this. After that, she had been wandering outside for many years. Although she had returned once, she had other motives. Perhaps she hadn't even communicated with the people of her clan, so it wasn't inconceivable that she didn't know her own identity. I courteously said a few words to the high priest, but the last stone in my heart had been lifted. With my current power, it wouldn't be difficult to obtain the 7-star mugwort. However, if I were to take action, it would be a small matter. If it affected the relationship between Yao Yao and the Qingqiu clan, it would be a big problem. Now, the Qingqiu clan was willing to give me the 7-star mugwort. Yao Yao's identity was the saintess of the Qingqiu clan. Although she wasn't familiar with the people here, with her identity, she wouldn't be bullied here. Everything on this trip had a perfect ending. I exhaled and didn't continue talking about Yao Yao's matter. Instead, I pointed at the god statue in the depths of the hall and asked the black-clothed high priest, "May I know who is being worshipped in this hall?" The black-clothed high priest, who had been pacing left and right, stopped when he heard my question. His dim yellow eyes moved to my face. After staring at me for a while, he shifted his gaze and said slowly, "This is the Fox King Palace. The one being worshipped here is naturally the Fox King." Fox King? His answer was far beyond what I had expected. After thinking for a while, I continued to ask, "Forgive me for being presumptuous, but since the one being worshipped here is the Fox King, why isn't he a fox, but a half-human, half-beast body?" When the black-clothed high priest heard my question, his expressionless face suddenly wrinkled into a smile before replying, "That's naturally because the Fox King has a half-human, half-beast body." This was a completely different answer from what I had expected. However, since he had already said so, I was too embarrassed to continue asking why the Fox King had a half-human, half-beast body. After thinking for a while, I could only awkwardly smile and explain, "To tell you the truth, I've previously seen a similar god statue in another place. That's why I was curious. It's not that I'm disrespecting your noble ancestor." I had originally thought that after I revealed this information, the black-clothed high priest would definitely ask me where I had seen such a statue. At that time, I would take the opportunity to get closer to observe and confirm the appearance of the god statue. Who knew that after I finished speaking, the black-clothed high priest didn't seem to care at all. He only nodded and said, "It's fine." After that, he didn't say anything else. This made me feel incredibly awkward. I wanted to continue asking, but I didn't know where to start. If I didn't ask, it would be too much of a pity to give up on something that might be related to my past after so much difficulty. Just as I was pondering, the Qingqiu high priest returned from outside the main hall. In his hands was a pale wooden box. The lid of the wooden box was open, and I could clearly see a short green mugwort in the wooden box. The mugwort had a total of 7 green leaves, and each green leaf had 7 spots of dark silver starlight. Apart from that, the mugwort's roots and branches each had 7 spots of starlight, which were much brighter than the ones on the leaves. What was even more mystical was that there was no soil or water underneath this 7-star mugwort. Its roots were embedded into the wooden box, as though it had originally grown there. Although the Qingqiu high priest wasn't too happy to give me the 7-star mugwort, he didn't dawdle. He directly gave me the entire wooden box and told me, although the 7-star mugwort can take root and grow in a few seconds after it's plucked, if it isn't necessary, it's best to keep it in this box. That way, the 7-star mugwort's spiritual nature can be preserved. I nodded and took note of it. As I was about to thank him, the black-clothed high priest didn't wait for me to speak and said, "Young master, since you've gotten what you want, you should leave. The Qingqiu high priest doesn't communicate with humans. It's not convenient for the two of you to stay here." Since he had asked me to leave, I couldn't force him to stay. I had to bid farewell and leave the main hall with the fatty. At this moment, the skinny young man who had brought us here was still waiting at the entrance of the main hall. When he saw us come out, he walked forward and said, "My father asked me to send you away. Please follow me." The father he had mentioned should be the black-clothed high priest. Although I didn't see the father and son communicate, the Qingqiu high priest must have used some secret method to let the skinny young man know that we were leaving. I nodded and didn't say anything. I just asked him to lead the way. The way we left was similar to the way we had come. After a few minutes of twisting and turning, we arrived at the big rock where we had come from. The skinny young man didn't say much. After sending us here, he directly bid farewell. After he left, I looked at the wooden box in my hand and felt that something was wrong. The black-clothed high priest had sent me away too quickly. Moreover, before I left, I didn't even look at Yao Yao. It didn't seem right to leave just like that. Chapter 546. After the fatty exclaimed, he didn't wait for me to ask, and said hastily, Yao Yao is in trouble. Let's go back and save her. Then, the fatty turned to return to the territory of the nine-tailed foxes. Hearing that, I was shocked. But after thinking about it, I felt that something wasn't right. What the Green Hill Country's leader and the high priest said to me didn't sound fake. Yao Yao was their saintess. How could something happen to her right after we left? Moreover, even if something happened to Yao Yao, how would the fatty know? With that in mind, I grabbed the fatty and asked him, what's going on? The fatty took out the devil refining gourd from his chest pocket and waved it at me. He hastily said, didn't I use the devil refining gourd to help Yao Yao increase her realm in Chiyu's tomb? Any monster that enters the devil refining gourd will leave a soul imprint inside. As long as the distance isn't too far, I'll be able to sense their aura. Yao Yao's aura is very weak now. I'm afraid her life is in danger. So that's why I was furious. Without hesitation, I turned back with the fatty and headed back to the territory of the nine-tailed foxes. After walking for a short distance, we caught up with the skinny man who had sent us out. Hearing the commotion behind him, he turned back. Seeing that we had returned, he was stunned. Without waiting for him to ask, I walked over and made a hand seal. Circulating the true essence in my body, I pressed it against his body. Perhaps it was because he didn't expect that I would make a sneak attack, so he didn't react immediately. When my right palm touched his body, he opened his mouth and screamed. It seemed he wanted to chant some kind of spell. My true essence had already invaded his acupoints. No matter how high his cultivation base was, he wouldn't be able to stop it. However, contrary to my expectation, when my true essence entered his body, it didn't interrupt his spell. In the next second, his body turned into a wisp of black mist and vanished under my palm. Transforming into black fog should be a kind of camouflage. I should be able to detect it with 9-star heavenly spirits and insightful power. However, I was worried about Yao Yao and had no time to waste on him. I simply turned around and shouted at the fatty, use the devil refining gourd to subdue this guy. As I said so, the fatty behind me took out the demon refining gourd. I didn't see him chant anything, but a strong gust of wind blew in front of me. The black mist that the skinny man had turned into was swept away by the gust of wind. Everything was sucked into the fatty's demon refining gourd. Just trap him in the pot. Don't kill him yet. I hurriedly told the fat man before continuing to run towards the Fox King Palace. I didn't dare to stop for even a second. I wasn't sure where Yao Yao was right now, and I wasn't familiar with the environment of the Green Hill tribe either. However, if she was in danger in the Green Hill tribe, it would definitely be related to the tribe leader and the high priest. I had to find them as soon as possible in order to save Yao Yao from danger. The two of them had been in the Fox King Palace previously. Even if they left the Fox King Palace at the same time we left, they shouldn't be too far away. I had to rush to the Fox King Palace to find them as soon as possible. Currently, I had the cultivation of a celestial master. Even though I was dragging the fat man, my speed was still extremely fast. In less than half a minute, the two of us had returned to the Fox King Palace. Without hesitation, we charged into the palace gates. At that moment, there were several white-robed guards standing outside the palace gates, other than the young lady from Qingxiu. Seeing that the two of us were rushing towards the palace gates, they immediately stood up to stop us. However, in my anger, I naturally wouldn't waste my breath on them. I directly used the true Yuan power in the seal, and in no time, I defeated all of the guards. Bringing the fatty with me, I directly rushed into the Fox King Palace. After entering the original hall, I looked around. I didn't see the figures of the Green Hill tribe leader and the high priest. After hurrying forward a few steps, I looked at the half-human, half-beast statue in the depths of the hall. I saw the hunchbacked high priest in the black robe kneeling in front of the statue, while the white-robed Green Hill tribe leader stood by his side. He held a tray in his hand. and I didn't know what was on it. At that moment, the two of them seemed to have heard the commotion as they turned to look at me. According to what Yao Yao's mother had said, the two of them had the cultivation of a young god celestial master. With my current power, I wouldn't be a match for any of them, not to mention fighting both of them at the same time. It was impossible for me to win. I understood the difference in power, so I didn't intend to fight a rock with an egg. I turned to instruct the fat man. When I tell you to attack later, immediately take out the monster refining gourd. Don't give them a chance to attack. The fat man immediately nodded and held the monster refining gourd in his hand so that it would be convenient to attack at any time. After finishing the preparations, the two of us continued forward and hurried to the god statue. The black-robed high priest seemed to be in the middle of some solemn, sacrificial ritual. After turning to look at us, he turned back to focus on worshiping the god statue, as though his mind wasn't on us at all. At the side, Chief Qingxiu had already put down the tray in her hand. Her beautiful eyes were filled with murderous intent as she asked me coldly, "What is the meaning of this? Why did you come back and behave atrociously in my Fox King Palace's divine hall?" I ignored her reproach and asked her instead, "Where's Yao Yao?" "What did you do to her?" Hearing my reproach, Chief Qingxiu's gaze froze. After remaining silent for a moment, she replied, "Yao Yao is a member of my Qingxiu clan. Even though you've escorted her back, my Qingxiu clan has already used the 7-star mugwort to thank you for your kindness. Whatever happened to her now should have nothing to do with you." "Nothing to do with me?" I said angrily. "I brought her here because I knew that this is where her clan members gather. She won't be in danger here. Just now, you said that she is your Qingxiu clan saintess. How long has it been since then? And you've changed your story." Chief Qingxiu sneered coldly. "When did I change my story? She is our saintess. Of course, she won't be in danger in my Qingxiu clan's territory. I just want to tell you that whether or not she's in danger has nothing to do with you. Considering that you escorted her back, I can let you go now. However, if you continue to behave atrociously, don't blame me for not considering our past relationship." It was obvious that she didn't have the patience to argue with me. Her words didn't seem to be fake, but the fatty definitely wouldn't spout nonsense. I hesitated for a moment, then softened my tone and said, "It's not that I want to behave atrociously. Yao Yao came here because I promised her mother that I would ensure her safety. As long as you call her out and let me personally see that she's not in danger, I will immediately apologize to you and leave this place." I stated my final request, but Chief Qingxiu didn't care at all. She sneered coldly. "Who do you think you are? If the high priest hadn't spoken up for you, I wouldn't have given you the 7-star mugwort. I'll give you one last chance. If you don't leave now, don't even think about leaving." I had already lowered myself enough, but she still didn't appreciate it. I had no choice but to fight. I shook my head at her. "I won't leave until I see Yao Yao." "Then stay." The moment I said that, Chief Qingxiu's white hair fluttered even though there was no wind. He raised his hands and was about to attack me. Just as I was about to call the fatty, the kneeling high priest seemed to have finally completed his ritual. He stood up and said calmly, "Stop." As he spoke, clan leader Qingxiu's hands, which had just been raised, froze halfway through his actions. Only then did the high priest turn around and look at me. There was no emotion in his dim yellow eyes as he spoke in a hoarse voice. "Yao Yao is our race's holy maiden. Our Green Hill race's holy bloodline has existed since ancient times to dedicate it to the Fox King. In the past, the holy bloodline was left behind, and our race has not worshipped the Fox King for decades. Now that the holy bloodline has finally returned, we naturally have to dedicate it to the Fox King. Little friend, I advise you not to stop me." His words made my scalp go numb. Offer sacrifices to the Fox King. What he meant was that he wanted to kill Yao Yao and offer her as a blood sacrifice to this bulsh asterisk T god statue. I didn't know how important the Qingxiu tribe's ritual was to them, but I knew that I definitely didn't send Yao Yao back to be an offering to the Fox King. At this moment, the seemingly benevolent high priest Qingxiu had completely transformed into a bloodthirsty beast in my eyes. I felt chills run down my spine as I pointed at him and squeezed out a few words through gritted teeth. Now, hand Yao Yao over immediately. The black-robed high priest stared at me and sighed. He didn't say anything and waved at Chief Qingxiu. It was obvious that he had decided to attack me. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.